We made this.
Engage!
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
There are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we live.
I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. Make it so.
Hello and welcome back everyone to Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast for the We Made This podcast network, talking about the brand new series of Star Trek Picard on CBS All Access and elsewhere, Amazon Prime. I'm your host, one of your hosts, Tony Black. My fellow co-host, Kurt North, is off on an away mission. It's top secret for possibly Section 31, but, you know, we don't talk about those guys. So joining me in his stead this week to discuss Episode 5 of Picard, Stardust City Rag, is the venerable and a pretty expert Star Trek podcaster in his own right, Mr. Zach Moore. Zach, welcome to Make It So. It's great to have you aboard ship.
Greetings, Captain.
And you've time-travelled from the 23rd century, which has been your bread and butter on Trek FM's Standard Orbit recently, hasn't it? And although you are recently departing ship there, aren't you, really, to pastures new?
Yes, me and my co-host over there, Ken Tripp, have been doing Standard Orbit on Trek FM for almost 4 years together.
Yeah.
And our journey has come to an end over there. You know, we did it longer than the original series was on the air. So yeah. I feel like that is an accomplishment to talk about the original series for that long, and the movies and things like that. Definitely a fun ride, but it's kind of time to, you know, as I said, we recently, as of this recording, this week, we came out with our 299th episode. Not our 299th episode, but the 299th episode of the podcast. And we were on a majority of them. And basically what I said was, you know, there comes a time in a man's life when he only has so much to say about 79 episodes and 6 movies and 3 reboot movies of a show. So that's where we are. But I still love Star Trek, and I love being here to talk to you about it this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage anyone to go and listen to all the Standard Orbit episodes with particularly Zach and Ken. They were the guys who brought me on to Trek FM, which got me involved in meeting lots of people who you've listened to on this show and you will be listening to on this show. So Zach's very much opened the gate in terms of Star Trek podcast fandom for me. So it's really nice to have you on the show. And
what have I done?
Exactly, yeah. You've got a lot to answer for. But in this... This episode is a particularly interesting one, as we were just discussing off air to have you on for, which is the 5th episode of Star Trek Picard. As I say, Stardust City Rag, which first aired on the 20th of February 2020, was written by Kirsten Beyer and directed by the man, Jonathan Frakes, the big man himself. And it's essentially continuing the story of Picard. They are on their way, the crew of the Last Sirena are on their way to the previously mysterious Free Cloud to seek out Dr. Bruce Maddox, having picked up a surprising pilot in none other than 7 of 9 at the end of last week. And they find themselves going on a particularly enjoyable away mission, and lots of surprises and twists are subsequently revealed. So, but before I ask you what you give this out of 10, Zach, which I will obviously do, just because you haven't been on Make It So yet, what are you generally thinking about Star Trek Picard as a series so far? We're halfway through, and you know we've discussed online, and you've been in the Facebook group, Make It So Facebook group, talking about this and things. But am I right in thinking you haven't necessarily been in love with Picard from the first episode?
That would be a fair assessment, Tony. I think the first episode remains my favorite of the batch. Because I went into this with a very open mind, and I was very excited, obviously, for the return of Patrick Stewart, Picard, finally something post Star Trek Nemesis and live-action Star Trek, because everything after Voyager's series finale has been a prequel of some kind, or a reboot, or a combination of both. And this is finally, we're getting, Star Trek in the future from the Star Trek timeline, and returning Patrick Stewart. I mean, he's the greatest actor to ever be in Star Trek, and it's very exciting. I was at Star Trek Las Vegas when he announced he was coming back, so that was a great moment in my fandom. And the first episode it had a good balance of nostalgia and new ideas, and I was on board for that. And I was like, I'm going to see where this goes. And unfortunately, I feel like it hasn't gone very far in 5 episodes. I think that's be one of my criticisms of it so far, because we're halfway through the season, Tony.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I'm still not sure what this is about. Not just like what's happening, but like really what's it about? You know, as Gene Roddenberry used to say when people pitched him stories. Well, what's it about? Well, I don't know. What Star Trek Picard's really like. I can see some themes. I can see what they're doing, but I don't necessarily think it's working at a fast enough pace to in this binge culture. You know, I understand that storytelling has changed for, I guess, genre television since, the Next Generation was on the air. And I'm not asking for a carbon copy of Next Generation, but I'm not going to shout from the rooftops that everybody needs to be watching Star Trek Picard right now. That's kind of where I am with the show. If that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think it's, some people who listen to this might be frustrated with a response like that. If I'm honest, they might be listening to this podcast thinking, why would you criticize it in this way? And I understand that in a sense, but I think it's important that we focus on, not just what is really enjoyable about, Patrick Stewart being back, as you say, and all these exciting post-Nemesis storylines, but also from a little bit more of a critical standpoint, what's working and what isn't. And you're a smart enough, not just Trek fan, but fan of television and movies and all these things, to understand how these things work, what works in Star Trek, what doesn't work in Star Trek, what works in drama. So I think it's important to recognise that, even though there is lots to enjoy in this, and we have been enjoying lots, I've certainly been lapping it up, and I'd say I'm enjoying it a bit more than you are on an aesthetic level. I think I definitely understand where you're coming from in terms of the pacing, in terms of the fact that maybe a little bit it is constructed in such a way as a sort of mystery box storytelling structure that it's hard to sort of get a pin on exactly what the show is and what it will look like, maybe until episode 10, or maybe even the end of the entire series when it finally ends, however many seasons it gets. So, and that's a double-edged sword. That will be fine for some people who are looking at it from one particular level, but I think my sort of, I don't know about you, but my sort of thing is, if I showed this to somebody who'd never really watched Star Trek before, but had watched a lot of television and had watched a lot of drama, what would they think? And I don't know if they would be honestly saying that this is truly great storytelling and drama. I don't think necessarily they would. I think if you strip the nostalgia and you strip the excitement of seeing these characters and this world and all of the things we will talk about in this episode that get us excited, I think you strip that away, it does have issues. As was exactly the same with Discovery, even though I think it's better. So no, I think that's a really fair response, Zach, and I think it's important we look at both sides of it.
Thank you, Tony. That's why I enjoy talking about Star Trek and all fandoms with you. I think we have pretty level heads. And hey, if you love the show, great.
Yeah.
Right? I'm happy for you. Just make it. It's okay for me not to love it, right?
Yeah.
Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we're trying to say. But all the same, I am enjoying the idea and the fact that we get to talk about this stuff on a weekly basis.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. I think, like you say, in terms of binge culture, I don't think this would have been nearly as enjoyable they'd all gone out at once, had all 10 landed at once, and you were just watching them one after the other, and we did a podcast about the whole season. I think the fact it's weekly is allowing us to unpick it in that thrill sense of, they're going here, and that means this, and who's that? But then I think when we look at it as a broad season, it will be interesting to see what we think. And, Kurt and I are planning to do a roundup sort of podcast and think about if it's worked as a season of television, and that will be interesting, and we'll see.
It is interesting how when Netflix started having shows and other services started having shows, it got really popular for a while to drop everything in one day. Right? It's like, I'm gonna take work off and I'm gonna stay up 24 hours and watch every episode. That was popular for a while.
Yeah,
and we seem to be shifting back towards the weekly release, and I think regardless of the mystery box storytelling, the the chapters of one book for one season kind of idea we have going on in television these days. Regardless of that, I still feel that the weekly release is better just across the board, because you can actually tell the difference between episodes as opposed to like when they release it all at once. Like these seasons are. I'm talking about other shows now, right? But it's like it's a blur. I'm like I couldn't tell you what episode of what was like Daredevil or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Episode
Absolutely.
7 or 8 or 10 or 13. But this, I mean, even though I'm criticizing it for kind of moving slow and whatnot, I still know what episode was what and what happened, as opposed to what. No, which one was with the cube?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you do get that in a lot of these other shows, like you've mentioned, the Marvel Daredevil ones, or something like Stranger Things, which I do enjoy a lot, but I can't distinguish a particular episode. I can think of a season. I can think of roughly what the last season of that show looked like, but I couldn't tell you what happened in a particular episode, with maybe one or two exceptions in that series. But
right, and then it's like a flash in the pan of the social consciousness, right? It's like, hey, Stranger Things season 3 is coming out. Comes out one weekend. People talk about it for about a week, and then it's moving on.
It's gone.
So.
Yeah, and Star Trek, perhaps more than almost every other franchise, deserves more than that every time it comes out. And thankfully, that's what it's got. I think if there's one thing that's been a real success, it's how they've marketed Picard, it's how they've sold Picard, it's how they're promoting Picard. It is emblazoned over Amazon Prime constantly, and I think that's fantastic. They've really gone to town in trying to put this out there and promote it, and it seems to have done very well in terms of ratings, and they're really giving it a care and attention that it deserves, and I'm really pleased with that, and it's great that so many people are enjoying it, really. So, let's talk about this one then. What did you think? What would you give Stardust City Rag then out of 10, Zach?
Ooh, we're gonna rip this Band-Aid off right now, aren't we?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Man, I tweeted this out after I watched the episode, and I said, if you would have told me there was going to be an episode of Star Trek Picard without any of the Borg Cube storyline with Narek or
you would have cheered.
I would have been like, that is amazing. It's going to be my favorite episode.
Yeah.
Although I found it quite the reverse, ironically. I am going to give this a 4.5 out of 10.
Wow, okay. Give us some reason then. Why would you rate it so low then, below average?
Well, 7 of 9 shows up in this, right? And it's like, wow, a returning character from Voyager, amazing, right? Although I found her function in the plot, she could have been anybody.
Yeah.
I think there were a couple of moments that I actually we'll talk about it, obviously, but there were a couple of moments I really liked with 7 of 9. But for the most part, she kind of came and went just randomly. They randomly came across her, and then she's gone. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that's it. Maybe she'll come back because she left Picard a calling card at the end. So that was... the return of 7 to 9 was a little underwhelming, in my opinion. Also, the building up to this, like, Bruce Maddox, it's like we've been talking about him for 5 episodes. We finally see him, and now he's dead without answering any questions.
Yeah,
because I think we were talking online and stuff when the show premiered. I'm like, okay, these are interesting things they've brought up. They have a lot of questions to answer, but I'm willing to see if they answer them. And now Bruce Maddox is dead. And I'm like, okay,
yeah.
And then I don't know. I really was not a fan of the we're gonna dress up and have a good time down on the planet. That was like a 15-minute sequence where they're like planning it, and then this I've noticed this in Picard. This is like the second or third time they've done this. They have these extended sequences where you have some characters in one setup talking about what they're going to do in the future, and later on in the episode, and then they're cutting back and forth between those two things. And it goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah,
it's like this sequence is lasting forever. This is an entire act of the episode. It's like the entire first or second act of this episode was one of these sequences. So that kind of left me a little cold. Also, I'm not the biggest Voyager fan in the world, right? Not gonna lie. But I felt the end of each ep was very, in addition to being just gruesome, like depressing, and. That new Trek seems to really enjoy being depressing. So, rewatching Voyager, with young teenage Icheb saved by the Borg, right? It's not going to feel the same now that I know he has a horrible, horrible, gruesome end. So, those are some thoughts off the top that helps you informs you to my opinion of why I rated it this way. And I just don't know where the show's going now, because I thought, like, okay, we're off to see the Wizard. We're off to find Bruce Maddox, right? That's like was what they were trying to do, in addition to finding Dodge's sister. And we've done that, and now he's dead, and we have no answers. And I guess Alison Pill has the answers. And we'll get those at some point, hopefully before episode 10. So those are my criticisms in a nutshell. Hopefully that informs why I rated it so low. And hopefully no one turns off the podcast now being angry at me.
Yeah, we've just shed like 500 listeners.
I'm sorry, Tony.
No, you know what? It's important. I really do think it's important to be honest, because there is a lot of people out there, there's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of critics who might just decide that they're gonna love everything about this show.
It's the greatest thing ever!
Yeah, right, you know. And I don't think it helps anybody. You know, it doesn't help in terms of a show developing and getting better, and you know, producers who are, you know, and I do like the people who are involved in this. I really like Kirsten Beyer, I like Alex Kurtzman, you know, I'm Michael Chabon. They're all really talented people in various different ways. And, you know, if you listen to the main Star Trek Picard podcast produced by CBS, where they're interviewed weekly about the episode, which is a really good listen, you know, they talk really intelligently about it, and they love Trek, and, you know, you really feel how much they put into this. So I've got all the goodwill in the world towards those guys. But if we're not honest about what does work, what doesn't work as well as what does work about this show, we're not going to get a better season 2. We're not going to get, you know, those classic Star Trek episodes. And the reality is, I don't think in the entire Trek new era we've had a truly classic Star Trek episode yet. I don't think we have. I don't think we've had anything that you could put up there with, you know, the best of both worlds, In the Pale Moonlight, TOS. And I know people's vary. I mean, mine would be Space Seed, for example. But, you know, people vary on those.
No, you're absolutely right. And I guess when I saw the preview for this episode, I thought, oh, is this going to be like a little standalone adventure episode? Because they're like, oh, they're going down to a planet, they're dressing up. You know, I don't know. Because I think about the episodes that stick out to me of, like, Discovery, for example, because that's the other new Star Trek you compare this show to. Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad from season 1 of Discovery. It's like a little self-contained episode in a greater whole, and then also a New Eden from season 2 of Discovery. You know, those are probably my 2 favorite episodes of new Star Trek, if you will, and because they remind me the most of old Star Trek. But I would say old Star Trek is Star Trek, so it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the identity of this franchise, and I think that's why me, as a fan who's grown up watching it and is very familiar with the entire series and movies and franchises, I gravitate towards those because that reminds me of the old stuff while still being new, and I think that's a balance you can achieve, and I think it's lazy to say, well, TV's changed, it's different now. That's an easy out, in my opinion. So.
No, it is, and I think it is easy to say that, and you will get a lot of people say that, and a lot of people almost weirdly and reflexively seem afraid to admit that maybe they don't like this new stuff as much as they do the old stuff. You know, it's almost like they should be saying, oh no, you know, we need to be, this is new, this isn't for us, and that kind of thing. And yes, that's true in one sense, but also it's okay if you prefer Deep Space Nine. It's okay if you prefer The Next Generation. It's okay if you prefer Voyager. I'm not sure why you would, but it's okay if you do, right? It's that. I'm not insulting Voyager fans. I know it's very popular, but like you, I don't particularly love all of it. But yeah, you know, I understand. I think that's fine. I think that's okay to admit, and certainly for people of our generation, you know, we grew up with the 90s and naughty stuff and the late 80s stuff. Much like our parents would have, if they were Trek fans, they grew up with the 60s stuff. They grew up with the movies, maybe even more so, you know? So everyone's got their own particular nostalgic favourites and the things they gravitate towards, and that's absolutely fine. And there have absolutely been things in this new era that I've really enjoyed. I really have liked a lot of this Picard series. I genuinely have as a Star Trek fan. I would say I would give this about a 6. I think it's probably among the weaker episodes of the season. I didn't particularly, and I wasn't on last week's episode, but I didn't particularly love Absolute Candor, but I think it maybe had a little bit more in it than this, in terms of what it was saying.
I thought the Absolute Candor was actually, being the bad cop here in this conversation, I will say Absolute Candor was probably my second favorite episode of the season after Remembrance. So that's kind of where I stand. That helps people.
No, exactly, and I can understand that, and I think you're going to get a lot of very different lists with this. I think you're going to get people who, I think right now, I don't think anyone disagrees that Remembrance is probably at the top of most people's lists, I think. But then beyond that, I think it's shifting around. I think it's different for different people. And that's absolutely fine. I didn't think this was that great either. There were bits I liked in it. There were certain points I liked in it, and we will discuss those. But I think as a whole, it was struggling it to try and balance everything it was trying to do, and it didn't quite click together. Whether it clicked together more on the page, and I think part of the problem with some of these new Star Trek series is that sometimes it might even be on the page and it doesn't quite translate into when it's actually put on screen. I think Picard has had that problem at times with some of the characters, some of the dialogue, particularly some of the script work at times, even though everyone is doing their best. I think there have been points with that. I think this episode really showed that more than any of the others for me. I think this was the one where it was a little bit, maybe a bit more high concept. You know, they go to Space Vegas, dress up as a group of, you know, pirates to try and extract Bruce Maddox. And in that sense, it's funny what you were saying about the structure, because this very much reminded me of the TV show Alias from the early 2000s, which was produced and Alex Kurtzman wrote for years ago. And that whole show, where I won't go into too much detail on it, but that whole show is about a spy, and every episode she goes on different missions, and you often have a structure where she's being briefed on the mission and you're seeing the mission take place at the same time, and it sort of flits between those two things as part of the actual structure. And in Alias it had a real zip about it, and it actually works in the context of that. This, like you say, drags quite a bit, you know, and it's clunking into place. But I can see what potentially Alex Kurtzman has influenced there in terms of the script and in terms of Kirsten Beyer. That's my instinct anyway, that it's playing off those kind of things. It's trying to create a more of a, you know, espionage caper feel to this episode that doesn't really work.
It's interesting you bring that up, Alias. I'm not familiar with... I mean, I am familiar with Alias, but I've never really watched the show, to be honest. But what it did remind me of was Mission Impossible, which is, of course, J.J. Abrams produced.
Absolutely. So, and Alias is very
family
much...
of storytelling, yeah.
Alias is very much a 2000s version of Mission Impossible mixed with James Bond. So, yeah, 100% that, yeah. Can see that, definitely. Because that was all costumes, wasn't it? Mission Impossible. It was all dressing up and, you know, as Elnor, you know, doesn't understand, playing a character.
Okay, Elnor, right? The whole last episode was setting up he's gonna join the crew, right? And he doesn't really have much to do until that very last scene where he decapitates someone, because there can be only one, and and then. The next episode, he does nothing. Like, he has nothing to do here, and I'm like, is he going to be a comedy character? Because he's like, do you guys get it? He doesn't understand what they're doing. I'm like, okay, is he like they're trying to make him like the Data or Worf of this group, where it's like, I never understand their humor either, like that that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know, but I'm like, I expected him for all this set. They devoted an entire episode to going to his planet, establishing his backstory with Picard. But now he's part of the crew, and I think, you know, talking about pacing inside episodes or even as a season, I think it's a disservice to that character to be like, you spend all this time, to all this effort to bring this new character in, and then he does nothing but have a couple of, I guess, joke lines in this episode, right?
It worries me, though, as well. I mean, I might be on my own with this, but I don't think the actor playing Elnor is very good at all, to be honest.
Well, I don't know, because he's had almost nothing to do, so it's hard to say, but I see why you would say that.
He seems very flat.
Let's give him more time, but there's nothing that hooks me in with him. He's just kind of there. I see why you would say that at this point, for sure.
But you're right, we do need to give him more time. We do, and he needs a bit more material, but he was very flat in absolute candor for me, and I felt like there were points here he's trying to lean into the... You know, the playing that sort of monotone, sort of straight up alien sort of figure within the crew, and it does not quite work.
Right.
But we'll get into this a bit more later, you know. But it's interesting. It's a mixed bag, this one, and I think it will be. There's a lot to dig into, so we'll do that in a second. Before we do, I just want to quickly thank everyone who's been listening, who's been rating and reviewing the show. Please keep that up on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review and a rating. And please keep commenting on Facebook in the Make It So Star Trek Podcast Facebook group, and on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard as well, where people have been giving us thoughts and following us and things like that. It's fantastic, guys. Keep that going, and we are going to look at some feedback later on. But yeah, let's dig in then, talk a bit more about Stardust City Rag. We begin with one of the things we talked about on Make It So is that each episode seems to have begun with some level of a flashback. And this is no exception, actually, even though it's not fully in the same vein. It does begin with Seven looking a bit more into her backstory. It begins on according to Memory Alpha, because it was a little bit unsure. I've double checked this. It begins on a planet called Vergessen in the year 2386. So this is a year after the Mars attack, basically.
They're mixing it up. It's not 14 years ago. It's 13 years ago.
13 years ago, yeah. Where we are reunited with Icheb, who you briefly mentioned earlier, who is a character from the Star Trek Voyager days, the later years of Star Trek Voyager, who's one of the Borg children that is recovered by the USS Voyager in the Delta Quadrant by the crew of Captain Janeway, and Seven ends up helping them re-assimilate into their lives and start learning about, potentially becoming like Starfleet officers later in the day, and Icheb is one of the main characters in that little group, and the one that really stood out the most, I think, in the Voyager years to fans. And, well, this is quite a brutal death for that character. One of the more brutal scenes in which his Borg, technology is, like by an evil set of scientists, yanked out of his body without any anaesthetic. And I mean, this is ostensibly, presumably, although I'm starting to have my doubts about this, a family show, and this was graphic stuff, Zach, I thought.
That's the thing about Star Trek. It's always been, with exception, okay, there are certain exceptions.
Yeah.
I think that's important. It's always been a show you can sit and watch with your kids, your family. I grew up watching with my parents at a young age. That's why I'm a fan, so I'm sitting here talking to you today, right? And absolutely, you cannot show your kids if they're, like, under 12 Discovery or Picard. And I think, and people are quick to say, well, in conspiracy, they blow up someone's head. Like, yeah, I understand that. I understand that, right? But there has been a consistency of just the graphic nature, like violence, sex, whatever you want to, whatever category you want to put graphic under, of Discovery and Picard, of CBS All Access Star Trek. And it's really intense. And unfortunately, that is a barrier to younger viewers. So is that who this is for? I don't know. You say it's a family show. Is it? I don't know. But definitely, this is something you would see in a hard R film. Yeah. Someone's eyeball being ripped out of their face as they scream in agony and then have to be killed, have a mercy killing by their friend because they're in so much pain. Also, a quote-unquote beloved character who we know from the past as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of things with this. I mean, one of the things we've talked about on the show and in the Facebook group is that particularly with the profanity, which Picard has had.
You're shit out of luck, JL.
Yeah. And that's mild.
Right, that's mild, yeah.
I do wonder if we're not far away from somebody dropping the C-bomb in this show, And there's been a real sort of, I think, question mark as to whether or not that's okay and whether that fits. In terms of that, I'm of the mind that I think it's a parental choice. I think if you have a child who's a young teenager and you want to show them and you want to talk about why those words are used and things like that, that's fair enough, and it's potentially a choice I would make as a parent to actually do that. However, something like this, I think, you'd really have to really think about it. You'd really have to think about, this is a visual image that a particularly young child is gonna be scared by. It's going to give them nightmares, something like this.
Well, and I think you look at Star Trek in the past. I mentioned conspiracy, right? That's the one people go to because they literally blow up someone's head. But it was stylized violence, sci-fi violence, you understood that wasn't real. This is so realistic looking that it's unsettling, and
this
that's
is like something out of a Saw movie.
Here.
This is like something out of a
yes, that's exactly what I thought, Tony. I thought, what is this, Saw 8? Right? I think that's what we're at now. So.
It's dark.
I want to play a game.
Yeah, and it's a difficult one. I think people will have their problems with it, and regardless of the fact it's Icheb or not, whatever character it would have been, you would have been like, and maybe the point is that they did this in such a visceral, horrible way to really underscore the point that, we're supposed to really care and it's supposed to really be disturbing and horrifying and, oh my God, Icheb, which I think works in a couple of different ways. I think you've really got to be a big Voyager fan for this to really land. I think a lot of more casual Star Trek fans won't have a clue who Icheb is. They might know 7 of 9 is, but they won't really necessarily remember Icheb. I think you've got to be a pretty hardcore Star Trek Voyager fan for that.
Yeah, because
And-
he was, I think, season 6 of Voyager.
Yeah.
Is when the Borg kids showed up around then. Yeah.
Yeah, who's watching it by then? But that's it. Except for the hardcore Voyager fans, I don't know. And I think so. I think there's that aspect to it. If I'm a cynic, Zach, do they kill off Icheb in such a visceral way because of concerns that go beyond the show?
Okay, so let's talk about this.
Let's talk
briefly.
about this. Yeah, I think we should.
The original actor, Manu Intiraymi,
Yeah.
he said some controversial things on Twitter, social media, and I understand why they wouldn't want to bring him back to Star Trek, I guess, because of that. Although, as an aside, I really hate recasting. And I think, okay, if you have decided that you don't want to associate with this actor anymore, then use a different character.
Yeah.
And bring back that actor. Because what is the... And we'll get to this later. What is the point of bringing back characters who you know, guest stars, guest characters, but not bringing back the guest star?
Yeah.
Right? It's just... It's a disconnect. So that's its own category. I don't know. I would have still brought the guy back for this one scene on a table. Right? I mean, that's just me. That's where I am with it. I haven't done too much research into the things he might have said and the people that might have been offended, so I apologize. I am not the most knowledgeable about this, but just as a person who is vaguely familiar, because, as the average person, I don't think they're plugged into all these intricacies of Star Trek actors' social media accounts.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
You're not going to know, and you're like, oh, that guy looks different. If it was the same guy, you'd be like, oh, yeah, I know that guy. Because, as we're talking about, like, I'm sure there's countless thousands of people who watched Voyager, who remember Icheb, who remember the actor, and don't know there's any kind of controversy going on. They're like, oh, why do they recast him? That's weird.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, that you're probably right. Much as I say that I don't know if everyone's going to remember Icheb, you're right. There will be a core group who would be potentially going, "Wow, hang on, that's not him. That's not Manu." And I'm like, well, it's hard to say. I mean, it's something I can't imagine them ever really commenting on, particularly.
Yeah.
Certainly not officially. And I think it will always be open to debate as to whether or not he was approached. And did he say no because the part was tiny? Did they? Was there no conception of his social media posts, which from what we can tell, seem to be regarding a Star Trek actor particularly, and have been quite unsympathetic to things that have been going on there, which may not have helped. Did they think, well, maybe there's a bit of controversy around this guy, let's not cast him, let's cast somebody else? Did they think we won't approach him because it's such a small part, he won't be interested, it doesn't seem there at any point, maybe we've got to pay him more money, just get a random guy in we don't know, a guy called Casey King plays Icheb here. Or was it the fact that they purely just choose to sacrifice Icheb because they want Seven's actions to have been for a really important reason? And I think there is possibly a mix of all of it in there in terms of the reasons why. I certainly think that maybe Icheb was chosen because, and we'll come to this later on, I think they want to give Seven some level of justification for some of the things she does in this episode. And I think it being Icheb helps with that. So that could be a major reason. It's to service Seven, ultimately. It's nothing to do with Icheb. He's just a body there. It's all about Seven's character, and the fact she has to shoot him to put him out of his misery, adds again to the whole thing. She has to sacrifice this character, this guy she describes as her son.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's probably a little truth into all those reasons. I would find that a little twisted if they said, you know what, we don't like this actor, so we're going to recast his character and then kill him off to make a statement. Like, wow, okay.
That might be a bit much, yeah, possibly, yeah.
I wouldn't go that far.
There's a conspiracy for Raffi to look into, I tell you. There's one.
So and again, I just want to make it clear, I have only heard through fellow fans, because I didn't really realize there was a controversy about this guy, and then I need to look into it further. So I put a big asterisk on all my comments about the
same
the recasting here. So
same,
anyway.
yeah, it's open to debate really, but that establishes Seven and the trauma of her past, and then we're on Free Cloud, and
we have another flashback, Tony. We've gone from 13 years ago to 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, exactly, to the character of Bejazzle, who is basically a gangster. She is a gangster in the in Stardust City on the planet Free Cloud, and she finds out through a henchman, Vup, who we'll talk about later because he's fun. that Bruce Maddox is around. She wants to kill him at first, and then she decides, actually, no, I'll interrogate him, put him in a trance, and find out a little bit more. And she ends up learning that he did have a base. It was wiped out by, he believes, the Tal Shiar, and now he's on the run. Firstly, let's talk about Maddox then being recast, because you mentioned this a minute ago. I think it was all through this, we've debated this on this podcast. Are we going to see Maddox? Is he going to be dead? Is he going to have been dead for a while? Are they going to have Brian Brophy, who played him in The Measure of Man, back? And all these different things have been questioned. When the trailer for Stardust City Rag came out last week, I was pretty sure that we saw Maddox in that trailer. I said it on the podcast. I think we've seen Maddox. And I couldn't tell whether it was the same actor. Did a bit of IMDb searching. It didn't seem to be that he was listed as coming back into Picard. And people were saying, well, he doesn't seem to be. And now you've got this actor called John Ailes, I think his name is, who plays Maddox here, who looks similar to Brian Brophy, to be fair. There doesn't seem that they've cast someone who's similar looking, even though he's sort of under a big heavy beard, because it's the beard of trauma, because he's old. So it doesn't really... And I think maybe that's the point, in that they thought, well, actually, who's really going to care? This guy appeared once in 1988, or whenever it was, in a character who has only been on screen once, and 30 years later, is anyone really going to notice? What do you think, Zach? I mean, is this something that is only going to bother us as long-term fans?
You say, who's really going to care? And I think that's the problem with a lot of these decisions that new Star Trek makes.
Right.
It's like, you guys are talking about a franchise that exists today, because in the 1960s, people would, write their own technical manuals.
Yeah.
And, built off of obsessive fandom. So who is going to care? You're right, the hardcore Star Trek fans who know these episodes in and out. Measure of a Man, you guys have decided to base your entire storyline over this season, this series, over that episode and this character.
Yeah.
So, if it, when it came out, I was like, oh wow, I was shocked when they name dropped Bruce Maddox, right, in the series improvement. Like, oh wow, okay, I was sure he was going to be dead, right? But I'm like, okay, if they bring this guy back, they need to get the original actor back. I mean, that's just how it works. In my opinion. I mean, and to your point, the new actor, there is a passing resemblance. The hair and the beard kind of hide that he might look different. It has been 30 years. I get it. Brian Brophy, not a famous actor. He's not Ricardo Montalban, right?
No.
You know what I'm saying? But come on, I actually looked him up recently, and he's been a drama professor, I think, at Caltech for the last 10 years, and he seems to be in good shape, and he's still an active because he's a professor there for drama. It seems like he's in acting still. He doesn't have a lot of screen credits. I think his last credit was 5 or 6 years ago or something. So yes, is it essential that you get this guy back? To your point, it was 30 years ago. He was in one episode. No, but I would have thought, if you're going to go to all and who knows, right? Who knows if they asked him? Who knows if they just decided it's not worth it? Who knows if they said, who's going to care? It's fine. I don't know. And maybe someday we'll get those answers. But it's a disconnect for me.
Yeah.
Because they're leaning so heavily on Measure of a Man and that kind of idea. And then, we finally get to the character, and I'm like, this isn't the guy that we knew before.
Yeah.
So, yes, as a fan, I'm annoyed by it. And I even brought up this comparison when, at the beginning of the season, I was like, do not Damon Bach this.
Yeah.
Because to have a real deep Star Trek cut, right? There's and forgive me for my tangent here, right? But there's a first season episode of Next Generation called The Battle. It's the episode where Picard rediscovers a Stargazer. It's revealed that he lost the Stargazer in a battle with the son of this Ferengi captain named Damon Bach, right? So he's kind of has a vendetta against Picard. He gets away at the end, right? Then season 7 comes around, and it was actually, I believe it was Patrick Stewart's idea. He's like, oh, this Damon Bach character, let's see what's up with him, right? and they... I think they couldn't locate the actor, so they just recast him. So it's a different actor playing Damon Bach, and I'm like, well, that's a huge disconnect. Again, if you can't get the actor back, or you don't want to get the actor back, you can write around it. It's not like you made a conscious decision to recast these characters. So now we have, spoilers, 2 characters who've been established in Star Trek past, right? Who have been recast and killed off in the same episode.
Yeah.
So the 1-2 punch is a little much for me. So again, forgive my in-depth Trekkie rage tangent, but that's where I stand on it, if that answers your question, Tony.
Well, no, it does. And could it be that they asked Brian Brophy and he said no? It could be that they went to him and he didn't want to do it for whatever reason. Maybe he's out the game. Maybe he wasn't interested. It's been that long. I mean, this is one of the things we have to remember, and it's something that really struck me when doing my X-Files podcast and trying to get in touch with X-Files actors who performed in this show 25 years ago. And I've emailed some of these people and they've gone, no, thank you, not interested. I did it 1 episode, 2 episodes in 1995. I don't really care. In a polite way, And I'm a bit like, well, do you know what? Fine. Fair enough. Like, it means a lot to us, but it maybe was just a gig to you. It was just a job. It was just a one-time thing. Could be that Brian Brophy's one of those people. He's like, it doesn't matter. It's just, it's, even though it's Star Trek The Next Generation, and it's probably the thing you'll most be remembered for in a way, some people have that way about them, and it could be that that's the way he sees it. We don't know. But I think I'd have... It does needle me a bit, like you. I won't lie. I wish it was the same guy, but I think to maybe on a production standpoint, I mean, for instance, if Jerry Ryan had said no and they still recast 7 of 9, that would be that's a whole different ballpark, isn't it? That's where you go, no way, you can't get away with this. She's too important. She's too beloved. She's too big a character. So I suppose it will depend on the way you approach it. But I get your point completely. And I think it's just fortunate in some ways that Maddox doesn't last very long.
Well, that's the thing. It's like he could have just been dead, right?
Yeah. He could have been.
And you could have gotten all the information you can get from him, you could have got without him being in it, and then you could have been like, oh, okay, well, he's dead. But the fact you go to the effort of recasting and putting in here and then immediately dispose of him without him answering pretty much any of the questions that you expected to get when you met him, when they set up all these mysteries in the first episode. So there you go.
All I will say is, and I mean this with the greatest amount of love, in terms of this kind of thing, because I love all these shows that do this. Welcome to mystery box storytelling, because this is exactly how it works. You build up to something, and then they pull the rug from under you straight away, and they leave you with more questions, and it's why it's going to drive so many people nuts, because this is kind of what Kurtzman does. This is what his MO is, in terms of a writer and a producer. So it's a double-edged sword sometimes, but yeah, anyway, so Maddox is with Bejazzle. We've got the credits, and then we're back aboard the La Sirena, and Picard is getting plenty of use out of this holoprogram of the chateau, which is handy because it's a nice set, and they didn't want to lose that.
Exactly. That's why it's there. Let's not kid ourselves.
That's why it's there. And he has a conversation with Seven in which we learn a few bits and bobs. So, I mean, one of the things about this I found really intriguing is because obviously Seven explains, she's working with this group called the Fenris Rangers, who are based on a planet called Fenris, and they basically keep a level of vigilante justice in a lawless area. And she's been described on the official Picard podcast 7 as a cowboy, essentially. That's how they've essentially reimagined her, reworked her. She's a cowboy looking out for people in the frontier, basically. That is, once the neutral zone collapsed, all these areas that were previously maybe in the Romulan Star Empire or on the border of Federation space have just descended into a lawless, free-for-all, hence Free Cloud, which seems to have rose up in that world. And that's what Seven does. And that's the kind of person she is. And she's quite, bullish about it. And she doesn't, who she is. It's what her life is. I found this scene interesting because they almost played it like Picard and Seven knew each other. And I thought, as soon as Seven was announced to be coming into the show, Zach, I don't know about you, I bet you Picard helped her after she came back on Voyager. Because if anything's gonna happen when she gets back, she's been deborged. Who's the person that Janeway's gonna go, do you know who you should have a chat with? Jean-Luc Picard. Because he's been there, right? He's been there to an extent of what you have. But they don't know each other, do they? And this has been said that they actually don't apparently have a pre-existing relationship. So, what did you make to this? Because I felt they played it specifically that they did know each other.
You're absolutely right, because when you hear that 7 of 9 is back in a Picard sequel show, you're like, oh, okay. I mean, it's great to see 7 of 9. Jerry Ryan, I just want to say the character of 7 of 9, right? Interesting character, great performance by Jerry Ryan. People, it's like, oh, she was just there for sex appeal. And of course, that was the initial idea. That's why they have her in a cat suit. She's obviously a very beautiful woman, but a very talented actress.
Yeah, definitely.
And, there's a reason why that character took over the show. Not just eye candy, but story-wise and her performance. I think she really is a great asset to Voyager. And that is a character that you want to see a follow-up for, because a human who was assimilated as a child, and then they're finally back at Earth. And I think it's one of the criticisms of Voyager, where it's like, how can you end the show where they're like pulling up to Earth? Like, I want to see them reassimilate, no pun intended, but into the Earth of the 24th century. So anyway, if you're going to flag characters to follow up on, I think that's an excellent character to follow up on, first of all. Second of all, you're absolutely right about why it would make sense for her to be in a Picard show. I think when we saw her in the trailer, that took everybody by surprise. Yeah. Right? And that Comic-Con, you're like, oh my God, it's 7 of 9. And then you're thinking to yourself, why is she in this show? And you're like, oh, well, of course. Like you said, Janeway would introduce her to Picard. Obviously, she knows Picard as established nemesis. Either before or after they had some kind of connection. Yeah. Let me introduce you to Captain Picard, who was also assimilated by the Borg. There's a lot of common ground there, right? And so that's a natural, organic thing for these characters to have known each other. And then even at the end of the last episode, where she's like, "You owe me a ship, Picard." Yeah. I'm like, oh, they have some sort of...
They know each other.
Like, 7 of 9. Yeah. I'm like, okay, they're letting us know that they have met, and that will be expanded upon when we see them in the next episode. And then they go and they have their meeting, and then Rafi and Diego Cabrera are out there talking, and... he's like, oh, do they know each other? I'm like, no, I don't think so. I'm like, oh, what? Yeah. Because you're right. They play it like there's a certain familiarity there.
Right.
Perhaps because they were connected in the collective at the same time, Tony.
Hey, maybe that will be the explanation. It was weird. I think I don't quite understand why they developed it that way. Why would you not have had it in the backstory that Seven at some point knew Picard and that he mentored her and he helped her? I mean, that's you could easily have done this with that. You could have absolutely thrown that in there. I think the familiarity. I mean, I suppose if you look at it from the other point of perspective is they would know of each other. Everyone knows who Picard is because he's a living legend. He would absolutely have known about Voyager,
except for that guy at Starfleet Command.
Yeah, except for the young guy. He's like, who? Jean-Luc. Who?
First name?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, apart from him, who presumably now is the outlier. He's the Dumbo, right, in Starfleet. Everyone else knows who he is. So, and he would have read all the Voyager reports, and he, knew Janeway, obviously, in some capacity.
Annika Hansen, yes.
Yes, he would know who she is, right? And he probably would know her face. So, I can understand it on that level, but then the way it's written is too familiar. It's too familiar for them to be just people who know of each other, I think, and it almost feels like it's almost meta in a way, in that we're supposed to accept that these two know each other because we know who they are and we know that they're connected in the Star Trek universe. So surely they will speak to each other in a way that is familiar, and I don't understand that logic because it doesn't actually fit with how it should be if they don't know each other. There should have been more guardedness. A little bit there, and it's odd. I just found it really odd.
Well, it's a perfect opportunity for exposition between the two of them if they haven't met. But as you said, they act like they know each other, and I don't know. It's an odd decision to play it that way.
It's strange,
and it's like the same. It's a different form of it, but it's the same idea of like Star Trek Into Darkness. My name is Khan.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Things that mean, and that's something it's like, again, I loved 7 and 9, the character, and I thought this is a great character to follow up on. Endless possibilities with this character. But I was disappointed about how they followed up with her because it's like this really, there was nothing there. I'm like, yes, shoot Icheb and then like Borg stuff. I don't know. I felt like she's came and went. And I thought she was going to join Picard's quest because perhaps, and again, I don't want to like project my fan theories onto it, and maybe that's why I was disappointed. I know that's a criticism. They didn't do what you thought, so that's why you didn't like it. Not the case. I just think there's such an organic, natural way for them to have a connection.
Yeah.
Because they're ex-Borg, and that's like a traumatic experience. And my favorite moment of the episode is the moment later where they talk about that very briefly. But it's my favorite moment. And I'm like, well, that's why she would join. That's why he would recruit her, or she would join his crew. Right? Something like that. As opposed to them randomly coming across her.
Yeah, it was all quite random, actually. And I don't think for one second that I think she'll be back. I mean, I absolutely think we'll see her again this season. I mean, they've essentially queued that up anyway. And I think that given we're going to go more into the Borg stuff now, and that it looks like Picard is going to get to the Borg cube and all this kind of thing, I mean, it makes a world of sense for Seven to be around in some capacity.
That's why it's so odd, because you're like, is she going to be connected with Hugh? Is she going to like? That's I wanted. I just assumed, I guess, because they're on these panels and interviews together, Jerry Ryan and Jonathan Del Arco. I'm like, oh, they're gonna, because they're friends in real life. Well, they're gonna have scenes together about these Borg, but she's completely disconnected from the entire Borg plot, which is just so odd to me.
It is strange at this stage. I mean, it could be that she ends up becoming more involved in that as time goes on, and she gets drawn into that stuff. But yeah, you're right. I mean, she and Jonathan Del Arco are good friends, and they've helped each other run lines together, and they know each other of old and things like that. And they were on the Picard podcast talking about that, and they, having that similar experience at the same time. But they're not. Yeah, right now they're not aligned. So I mean, I can imagine all this coming together towards the finale. Don't get me wrong, but I think your point about Seven essentially being in a role that could have been another character is true. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. For one thing, like, how does she end up involved in the Fenris Rangers? Because she's working for them before Icheb dies. She's working with them because, as we later find out, Bajazil had infiltrated the Fenris Rangers, and that's how Icheb was killed. That's how he ended up dead. So she was working with these people for a long time. After the Mars attack, was she working for Starfleet in that 5 or 6 year period before Mars? Was she in Romulan space helping out with the mission? Was she there? And then when the Federation pulled out, she go, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay and help these people in a way that Picard didn't. In that sense, because he had to pull back. So there's lots of unanswered questions as to what Seven was doing that might give a bit more context as to why she was there and why she was involved. Because they've turned her into a swaggering cowboy. Which is great in some senses, and I really like the fact she's sort of this lone ranger out there,
bourbon straight
justice,
up,
bourbon straight. I like that, and to be fair, I think credit to Jerry Ryan, because I think immediately she's in there and she knows this character. There's that line where she says, "I'm functional," and I was like, "That's bang on, that's 7 of 9," and all the way. And it's funny because she talks about in the interview on the podcast. The Picard podcast, about how at first when she read the script she couldn't hear Seven's lines, and then she spoke to Jonathan Del Arco and he said, well, why don't you play it like Seven's pretending to be more human than she is? And that's apparently where it clicked for her, and she then, because I think she felt like Seven was being written in more of a human way, and then she said, okay, well, if I'm pretending to be human and I'm not actually as human as I think I am, or I'm trying to be, then it makes sense. And I think whatever she did, it worked. Because, she's there. It is 7 of 9. And I think that's great. And I think that's one of the best things.
And I know that it's because Jerry Ryan looks the same.
Oh, my God, she hasn't aged at all.
You got to remember, this has been 20 years, right, of her being apart from the Borg Collective, right?
Yeah.
So, she's going to be more human. She would have acclimated more to being Annika Hansen again, right? So it makes sense that she's not, affirmative and all that stuff. Although there's enough, I am functional, there's enough of that in there where I can I can see how this is 7 and 9 20 years later. Yeah,
definitely. But you're right, she has obviously changed, and it's good. I mean, it would have been weird. They couldn't have done it that she's exactly the same as she was when she stepped off Voyager. It would have been strange. There has to be some evolution. But I suppose we need to give maybe the 7 plot a bit more time and see how that brews up, because it might be that.
And I hope there is more 7 plot. You're right. I mean, she literally says, "Call me if you need something."
I think there will be.
I think it might be like season 2 of Discovery, right, where you meet this character here and this character there, and you think you might be done with them when they come back in the finale. So maybe that's what we're looking at with 7 or 9.
I think so. I think we'll see her again. But
as great as to see her again, the Next Generation fan of me is like, okay, we have Icheb and 7 or 9 coming back. But there's no Geordi or Worf or Riker. It's like, yes, that's what I wanted in a Star Trek Picard show, to see the great reunion between Picard and 7 of 9. Oh, wait, they never met, so that means nothing. Eventually, we'll get Riker and Troy, I guess. They've been advertising that since the first trailers of this show. We're halfway through. I thought we'd see Riker and Troy on Earth, right? He's like, "Thank you for not trying to talk me out of this," right? I'm like, well, when does this take place?
Yeah.
What planet is that on, right?
Right.
But anyway.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, there's been some rumors that they might be on Beta Z, which might fit.
That's my assumption as well.
Yeah. So we'll have to see, won't we? Because I think that's going to come up in a few episodes. But I get your point. I mean, I think it would have been more satisfying had Picard and Seven had a pre-existing relationship. But then maybe they thought that was too much like Raffi. You know, maybe they thought that they've already got Picard having pre-existing, you know, dynamic with Raffi.
but they invented these new characters when it'd be more fulfilling to have him have a previously... Like, why can't 7 of 9 be Raffi?
Well, I just
right?
thought
It's
that,
like...
actually. How cool would that have been if she'd have ended up being his number one?
His first officer? That makes so much sense.
It would have, actually, in a weird way.
That's why... And I'm not a big fan of the Raffi character, honestly, because it's like they try so hard to make, hey, JL, like, I hate that. Yeah. I do. They try so hard to make them so familiar when I know about 24 other characters that could have been that Picard did have a briefly established relationship with.
Well, I mean, in fairness, I'm a little bit mixed on Raffi, and I will come to this in a bit. But I think, in fairness, some of the, and this isn't an excuse because it should be in the show, but some of the exterior material around this digs a little bit more into the JL stuff and Raffi's familiarity, particularly The Last Best Hope, the Una McCormack novel, because it gives you a little bit more of Picard's thought process of, you know, no one else would really get away with this, but for some reason I let her do it. So it helps Raffi in the show, actually, but there is stuff that maybe should have been in the show. So I you know, it's a mixed bag, but I think absolutely Seven.
Well, Tony, I'm already paying for CBS All Access. Are you telling me I have to go buy novels and comic books as well?
Come on. It's a multimedia world, Zach. This is how it works. But no, it's true. These things should really be in the show. But I think just before we leave this scene with Seven and Picard, which obviously establishes the Fenris Rangers and that she's there and that once he mentions Soji, she will help him then. At first, she doesn't want to know. But I think turning Seven into this lawless, sort of lonely ranger, and quite a few people, and I think one of the comments mentions this, have been saying, well, you know, where's Chakotay? Where's Janeway? You know, I think you got to remember this is 20 odd years later, so you know, she's not going to be in the same place in her life. But also, the fact that Seven is in this quite dark place, as Picard has been in a dark place, and all these kind of characters, it looks like Riker and Troy might be relatively happy when we see them, according to the trailers. But most of them have not sort of had a happy ending. And I think it's sort of thematically is representing the same thing. That what this show is doing, and maybe this is what it's about, Zach, is that we thought that the 24th century would have a happy ending. We thought that when the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine were being filmed, even though DS9 had the Dominion War and all this, in the end, they prevailed, you know? I think back then we had more of an optimism about what the future would bring. And, you know, as we know, Star Trek always reflects its age. And I think Picard is coming out in an age where there isn't a lot of optimism. There isn't a lot of hope. And I think it's almost reflecting that in that these characters have kind of not gone where we thought they would go. They've not really achieved what we thought they would. They've lost a lot of themselves. And they're trying to rediscover that. And they're trying to figure that out in a very dark world that is quite unfamiliar. And they can't really trust anything anymore. So I think on that sense, Seven fits this thematic character idea of what all of these main characters are in the show, and I did like that aspect.
She does fit the dark Star Trek that we exist in.
Dark Trek.
I agree with you. Dark Trek, yes. # Dark Trek. Although I will counter your comment there and say, you know, Star Trek came out in the 60s, a very dark and trying time for the world and America, and part of the reason why it was so popular was that it presented a hopeful future, you know. Which set it apart from most dystopian science fiction. You ask people, like, what sets Star Trek apart from, you know, all these other science fictions? Like, well, it's a hopeful future. You know, Roddenberry's like, it's not going to all end in a big flash and a bomb, and, you know, we're going to overcome this and come together and all that kind of stuff. And I think, you know, Deep Space Nine ran that balance of that very well. You know, like the utopia versus, you know, practical application of utopia, right? And I don't know, like, I think, and that's kind of my overall criticism of the show, kind of our just overall, like, it seems more like a Firefly, a Battlestar Galactica, you know, for a science fiction action show, sure, but it's Star Trek, so I think that's and I know that's hard, right? I know that's hard to write, but that's kind of the DNA of Star Trek, is to be like, things are going to be okay, right? And that's part of the appeal. So that's where I come from it with. But yes, to your point, not to go on another tangent here, sorry.
No, it's fine.
To your point, this new, like, you know, the edgy Seven of Nine fits the edgy Star Trek they're presenting to us here. I agree with that assessment.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because when I think about, and what you've just said is true, and there is a lot of truth to that, and I've heard this before talked about how, you know, the 60s almost seems to run counter to that. But at the same time, I always feel like, from what I know about the 60s and what I've read, you know, I wasn't alive. You know, we weren't alive at that point. But,
I wasn't either, to be fair.
No, in fairness, neither are you. But you know, it doesn't mean we don't know. We don't know things about that time. You know, I'm not of the opinion that you only know history if you've lived through it. If anything, the reverse is true. You know more in the long run. But I think, you know, looking back at the 60s, it feels like it was a time also though where, yeah, there was a lot going wrong, and there was a lot of, you know, worries out there, and the threat of the, you know, nuclear apocalypse and all this kind of thing. But, you know, economically, people's lives were improving. There was a lot of counterculture at that time. There was a lot of the civil rights movements was on the march, and there was a lot more optimism in terms of that kind of stuff. So at the same time, while there was a lot of difficulty, there was also hope. And I think that if you'd have had the Star Trek made in 1975, you might have ended up with a very different show, actually, because by then a lot of that had changed, certainly in America. So I think it depends. I think there's two ways to look at it, really. But there is no denying that there is a distinct lack of hope in a lot of this new Star Trek. In many ways, it is very dark. And maybe that is something that will come more in Picard and will come in Discovery's third season. But I get your point completely.
Yeah, and I like Firefly and Battlestar Galactica. Like, those are two of my favorite sci-fi shows that don't have Star Trek in the title, right? But those are those shows, and I think that this is, I mean, you have this, right? Like, I think Captain Rios is like a Malcolm Reynolds rehash, kind of, you know, like those kind of things. Like, it's like I just find like this show has more identity in these other kinds of sci-fi shows than Star Trek itself, if that makes sense.
No, I can absolutely see that, and I think there's a lot of truth to that, definitely. For better or worse, really. Next up, though, we've got Dr. Jurati, and she's confirming something that was, and again, I'm going to tap the multimedia Zach, because if you've read The Last Best Hope, this was confirmed in that she and Bruce Maddox were in a relationship. In that book, you do see that. You do see that relationship without spoiling too much. You see the genesis of that and how it comes together back in the day. And, you know, she's watching a holo video of him baking cookies and things like this. And, I mean, you know, all through this podcast, Zach, I've been saying, I don't trust Agnes Jurati. And thankfully, I'm right. By the end of this.
Yeah, she was a little too like, oh, what's going on? Yeah. Like, it was her showing up at the chateau in the third episode, I believe, when the Romulans attacked Picard there. That was way too convenient. Yeah. And we know now that, like, they were kind of overplaying how clueless and happy and, you know, she was to, like, sure she has a dark side. So I had my I didn't know if they were going to do it, but I had my suspicions about her as well, because she was just so like, oh, hey, I'm here.
Yeah.
So the twist is, quote unquote, more effective that way.
Well, yes. We'll talk about that in a bit. But the somebody in the Make It So group actually was recently made a comment about whether, you know, trying to unpick the disruptor moment where she picks up the disruptor, and they were arguing that, you know, she could have just picked it up as she came in, and we don't know, and that is going to be an open question, and we will know more later on, and we'll talk more about this later as to why she's done what she's done by the end. But yeah, it establishes a point that all through this episode, you know, she seems very anxious about Maddox being found and about things being revealed and things like this. And you see, obviously, there's more to her relationship, which I think a lot of people might have already sort of guessed at. I think it was. I don't think. Were you particularly shocked to see that she and he were in a relationship?
No, not really. Yeah, it makes sense, I guess. It didn't feel like, what?
Yeah.
Just like, okay, yeah, I can buy that. I mean, there were professionals in the who work very closely together, obviously, on this project, and yeah, it made sense to me.
So yeah, they finally get to Free Cloud, which feels like it's been coming forever because of last week taking a detour. And Free Cloud is essentially Space Vegas. It is just a big...
It's Canto Bight.
Yeah, it's Canto Bight, from The Last Jedi, definitely. It's that kind of, spacey, hologrammy, kind of, a hive of scum and villainy, basically.
Well, I felt Blade Runner, AI, that kind of future. Did you notice some of the signs, though, on the planet?
Yeah, wasn't there a sign for Mr. Mott's Emporium,
Mott's
or something
Hair
like that?
Emporium.
Very good.
Mr. Mott being the Bolian barber from the Enterprise D, which was a nice, fun running joke of a side character on that show.
Yeah.
And then apparently there's a Quark sign there too. I didn't see it myself. They obviously mentioned Quark later, but apparently there's a Quark sign there as well. So I guess he either franchised out or he relocated from Deep Space Nine. So.
Well, it's whether or not, as you say, Vop mentions Quark, and there's been some debate as to whether or not it's just part of the gag that, that's part of the backstory and the legend that they use Quark. But, if we take that at face value, he's not on DS9 anymore. He's on Ferenginar, and maybe, he's franchised, which would totally make sense if Quark has done that, especially given his brother's the Grand Nagus. If Quark has decided to go, right, I'm going back home and I'm going to become like Donald Trump, in the Star Trek universe. I could well imagine that happening. But yeah, I think this is cool. They did that earlier on, didn't they? In maybe Remembrance or either Maps and Legends, one of the two, where you saw a sign for Cassidy Yates flights and things like that.
Oh,
so
yes, very good.
There's some cool little nods and winks. What did you think of the advertisement stuff? Because when they arrive at Freeclade, you get these holographic advertisements with the Red Bolian who is advertising like an engineering stuff, and you've got Picard being advertised about a grand hotel, and Raffi being advertised drugs, which is a little bit...
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, it's a commentary on directed advertisement in today's world. It's like, you're scrolling through social media and you get advertisements, and they're based off your own search history, which is creepy, by the way. That it knows so much. But so, that's an interesting 24th century equivalent of that. I did like how Elnor didn't have anything because... being raised the way he was, he has no vices. They have nothing to advertise to him. I guess they just scan every ship, right? Yeah. And then personnel profiles, and then project things that way. We've never seen this kind of planet in Star Trek before, so there's really no precedence for it to be one way or the other. So that was a neat little thing to have, little wrinkle to this planet, I guess.
It's a clever idea. I suppose it's the closest we've seen is places like, Orion Syndicate planets, like when we saw in Honor Among Thieves in DS9, where O'Brien goes undercover in the Orion Syndicate and things like that, or maybe in Enterprise, where like the planet where T'Pol is a slave dancer, and those kind of things. I think we've seen similar sort of places, but not quite a Freeclade before. I thought it was interesting how, and I don't know if this is another clue, but how Agnes gets advertisements for robotics. Now, could this just be that, obviously she's a scientist in terms of synthetics, but is it a clue that she's an android? Because I keep coming back to this theory, I still think that she is some kind of synthetic herself.
Some kind of creation that Maddox made, and that's why she was so helpful in making more synthetics, because she was one herself, perhaps. I don't see. There's so many theories about her going. It's like, is she a double agent? Yeah. Is she an android herself? Is she like a Juliana Taylor type, Data's mom from season 7 TNG Inheritance? Who knows? By the way, they haven't mentioned her. They haven't mentioned Lore. They haven't mentioned Lol.
They might do. I mean, we got a Sung mention. We'll talk about this later. But so it could be. We'll come back to this because I think there's some theories.
Yeah, put a pin in
talk
that.
About. We'll put a pin in this. But yeah.
So I don't. They could do anything. She is a blank slate at this point because she's capable of anything. Clearly, so we'll see. They could go anywhere with her.
They could. It's quite exciting in that sense. But obviously, we've got Raffi doing a little bit of hacking in order to get them into what they call the Interfaces Guild. So there are what they call interfaces, who are like agents who work as intermediaries, and that's how she finds out that Maddox has been held by Bajazil, and they're going to bid with the Tal Shiara bidding for her and for Maddox to try and buy him. And Seven, obviously, she's got a connection with Bajazil, and that she.
Oh, does she?
Yeah. So she offers herself in exchange, and this obviously leads to the scene we've talked about before, where they
15-minute long scene.
15-minute long scene
back and forth. I legitimately got kind of tired of this scene because it kept going back and forth. But
what did you think about like the idea of the disguises? Because obviously it's playing on certain things, isn't it? I mean, Rios is I think my favourite new character. In that we talked about this in the podcast before, but I fully expected a Han Solo, and what I've got is quite an existential, brooding, haunted man, and I love that. And I think, and it plays up on that because Raffi says, you need a bit of panache, you need a bit of pizzazz, you got to play the pimp. And I think Santiago Cabrera does a really good job when he gets to Freeclade of doing that, but not doing that too convincingly. You know, there is still a point that you can tell Rios is acting, I think. Because, you know, there's a point where he's trying to do a little dance and stuff. It looks awkward, and I don't think that's bad acting. I think it's good acting. I think Cabrera's
actors
intentionally...
acting as actors is always complicated. Layers upon layers.
Layers.
Yeah. No, I think
he's a good actor.
You mention it, Tony. I think he probably is my favorite of the new characters. I didn't like him at first because I was like you said, what is this Han Solo, Mal Reynolds? Like, I'm smoking and drinking. I got a scar. I'm like, all right, guys, we get it. Right? Yeah. He's a rogue. He's a charming rogue, right? Plenty of those around in science fiction. But yes, there seems to be more to him as opposed to someone like Rafi, who I think is kind of one note. We see a little bit more to her this episode, and we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But I think I just don't like this style of like, okay, we're going to talk about what we're going to do. And then we're going to see what we're doing, and then we're going to keep cutting back and forth for 15 minutes. And then
I don't think you'd like Alias because it does that a lot.
Well, we'll see. I don't know. Honestly, though, the one thing that annoyed me the most is Picard doing a horrible stereotype of a French person.
Stereotypical accent with his beret and his eye patch.
I'm sure Patrick Stewart thought that was very funny, and I'm sure he enjoyed doing it, but I can tell like Patrick Stewart wanted to do this, and that's why we're watching it, as opposed to would Jean-Luc Picard ever do this? You know, and I know people get mad when you say, Picard would never do this. No, Picard would never do this. Like, I'm going to say it.
Well, I mean, one of the things that has come out, and I consistently feel, and I think it's good in some ways, and maybe this is an example of where it's not, is that Patrick Stewart and Picard are basically the same character now. They have sort of amalgamated into the same person, really.
But I agree with you, right? But here's the deal, right? People said the same thing about Kirk and Shatner, but Kirk and Shatner are similar. Yeah. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot more... The Venn diagram between William Shatner and James T. Kirk, it's a lot bigger in the center, right? The Venn diagram between Jean-Luc Picard and Patrick Stewart isn't that big in the center. And it's been expanded for this show. Yeah. So... I get it. And you know, it's funny. People are like, oh, Patrick Stewart's coming back. This is great. He wouldn't agree to do something unless it was amazing. And I say, well, you know, he was an executive producer on Insurrection and Nemesis. So.
Well, this is it. It's easy to just assume that he's a genius and everything he comes up with is genius. And there is undoubtedly elements of this that he's had a big input. He was in the writer's room, you know, would have had a big input on certain things, you know, and it would have been one of those things, I think, where, you know, they're not really going to say no to him a lot, are they? You know, especially given the amount they had to do to get him even in the door to even do this show. Right. You know, they've talked a lot about how they had this massive document and they had to have meeting after meeting after meeting, and he took a lot of convincing. So he had a big sway, I think, on what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think, for the most part, I think a lot of his ideas were probably really good. But I think, trying to be a bit of a Swazi French it's a bit a low. There's a TV show called Allo Allo. You may not be familiar with this, Zach, but it was a British sitcom. All I'd say is YouTube it, look it up. A British sitcom from the 1980s, which is set in the World War II, and it is based around a cafe owner, a resistance cafe owner in World War II, who is having affairs left, right and centre, and there are people with the most stereotypical accents who just... And it is funny on a base level, but it's all this kind of hello, it really is. It's camp as Christmas. And, like, honestly, this was a bit hello. So any British people will particularly get that reference, I think. But, it's a bit awkward, isn't it? It's a bit too forced in terms of comedy, I think. And
I don't know if I want to look too deep into this, but you know, in an episode that opens with a quote unquote beloved character having his eye ripped out in a gruesome fashion, is it tasteless to have your main character like, hey, I have a costume, I have an eye patch, right? I mean, am I the only one that thought of that?
Yeah, it might be.
No one think this through.
And that's where tonally there's a disconnect, isn't there? Because on the one sense, this episode feels like it wants to be a bit of a jokey caper and have them dress up and go out to this flamboyant planet and, you know, do a bit of
which we've seen before in Star Trek. It's like the new Trek's equivalent of a holodeck episode. That's kind of what I thought this was going to be.
Yeah, like Bada Bing, Bada Bang, you know, in DS9.
Yeah,
like, you know, or...
but they do not. The two do not meet.
No, they don't. It's you're right. It's weird. It is a bit of a disconnect. It doesn't quite fit. It's not. in the old days, this would have been a pure comedy episode, and it would have been played as a comedy episode. And some of the comedy episodes were really bad, but there were some brilliant comedy holodeck episodes, like, Our Man Bashir, for instance. Fantastic, where they all dress up, they all put on accents, Kira, Russian, and all this go, that's more French, isn't it? Kira being Russian.
O'Brien has an eye patch.
O'Brien with an eye patch, and Cisco being a brilliant Bond villain, all this kind of thing.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was great. That's so good, and they knew exactly tonally what they were going for. But this is, it's very strange in that sense. It feels like they wanted to inject a bit of playful colour into it in terms of costumes and all this kind of thing. And that's the thing. At the same time, they are acknowledging that it's silly. They're acknowledging that Rios has got to not be brooding and he's got to go out there and play a character. So, on one sense, I know they know what they're doing with this, and I know that they know what their reference points are, but it doesn't quite work. And that's it's a shame, actually, because when I first saw the trailer, I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. And it's not actually as fun as I thought it would be. Watching it, I was a bit like, oh, okay. It's really, it veers from silly accents to really sort of Seven about to strangle a woman to death because she ripped out the eyeball of her son. It's like, well, where are we going with this?
And I think that's going to confuse a lot of people who don't know Voyager. I mean, I at the end, she does say he was the closest thing I had to kin or family, right?
Yeah.
But she's like, oh, goodbye, my child. And people are like, what, 7 or 9 have a kid? Is that who this is? Because it's it's her, honorary kid, right? I mean,
basically.
like, she raised him as, when he came out of the collective. I understand that, being familiar with Voyager, but I feel like people are going to be like, what? Is that her son? Like, they're really going to think that.
Yeah, it could be, if you literalize it, exactly. And this is what I mean about how a lot of people who aren't hardcore Voyager fans are going to miss the Icheb stuff. It's not going to land emotionally in the way it probably should, really. So, yeah, it's a bit of a mismatch. But
so we have this entire act of this episode is like back and forth, and they're putting the costumes together, and we're seeing Rios come in, and he's talking to this humanoid reptilian guy. They really built him up as like a heavy, right? And we go back, and he can smell if you're lying.
I quite like that though, the Beta Inari guy. Yeah. What did you think of that? I thought that was quite a clever little, because it's like a version of the Star Trek version of the lie detector test, isn't it? I thought it was quite clever. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think it's funny how they were like, "Oh, he can smell what you had for dinner, and the last person you made love to," or something like that. So, sure, sure. And I liked how it was like an alien-looking alien.
Yeah.
That was like a big guy who was kind of a lizard, like of course, I think kind of the Gorn or something. But that kind of alien with those kind of abilities fits in Star Trek. So.
Yeah. There was quite a funny line as well from Seven, I thought, when they're talking about Rios's costume, and she says, "You need a feather in your hat," and she says it so deadpan, and then you see him with a feather in his hat. Things like that were quite good. But no, it's interesting how they invert that sort of heavy, that sort of henchman heavy, to being somebody who can give them a lie detector. I thought that was quite fun.
Yeah.
It's quite well played, and obviously there's
again revolving around Rios, who we both come to agree is kind of the best new character.
He's great. He's really good. I think he's a good actor, and I think he's a good character, and I really want to know more about him, and I think they will get there, hopefully.
Oh, there'll be a novel, don't worry.
There will definitely be a novel. I've said this. There will absolutely be a novel about Rios, 100%.
His Starfleet career.
Yes. I'm sure that's already being worked on right now, but I hope we get a bit more of that in the show as well, because I think he is a really good character. But yeah, obviously then we are finally getting to the point where... Well, actually, no, before that, we should talk about Raffi, because Raffi obviously goes off to find who we find out is her son.
She has only come on this mission like to hitch a ride.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, what is she doing? And throughout the episode, she's looking up somebody's personnel file, and then she's going off on her own, and there's like a goodbye moment, and I guess we're supposed to believe she's going to leave the show. The way characters come and go on this show, I'm like, well, maybe she is leaving the show. When they say go, because you had Picard's housekeepers, and they're apparently not going to be in the show anymore. 7 and 9 came and went. I thought, oh, maybe they're going to shake it up. She's going to leave for a few episodes and come back, because that's how a show like this works. But no, she just went to go find her son, as we find, right?
Now, again, Zach, if you read The Last Best Hope, you already knew she had a son. And I called this. I did call this in the podcast we did about The Last Best Hope, because I said, I bet you Raffi's going to Free Cloud to find her son. And it turns out that that's exactly what she was doing.
But how convenient is that her son is on the same planet that Bruce Maddox is, and Picard came out of nowhere to find her?
A little bit.
It's contrived, right?
And
it's
also,
contrived, but I'll allow it, I guess.
Well, I could, yeah, it is, and I couldn't quite understand his role. Like, was he a doctor? Is he a doctor? Is he an officer? You know, because I tell you what, I found really strange. On Space Vegas, there is a medical planning clinic. I didn't understand that at all. I was like, what's this doing here? Like, why is this here? It just really seemed weird that there was a hospital, like a family planning clinic, right next door to to like a den of iniquity. It was strange. Right. I didn't quite get that at all.
And is his wife a Vulcan or a Romulan?
Well, I wondered this, and originally I wrote Vulcan, and I was like, actually, it makes more sense in a way if she's a Romulan, I think, because
and that drives the wedge between him and his mom.
It drives the wedge between him and his mom. They're near enough Romulan space. You know, the neutral zone's collapsed, so all these sort of planets and worlds and races have filtered together. So I think she's Romulan, really. And one of the big things he's annoyed about, isn't it, that she's persisting on this theory that there is something dodgy going on. There's conspiracy.
Well,
everywhere.
she's basically become, because, you know, we used to say that Wolf 359 was the 9/11 of the Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
Apparently, the synth attack on Mars is the new 9/11 in the Star Trek universe, and she has become a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, basically. And she spiraled and got into drugs and alcohol, or the 24th century equivalent, right? And that distanced her from her family. So at least now, having not read the comics and books, Tony, excuse me,
yeah,
but
sorry.
at least now I have some context for her character, right? I'm like, oh, okay. Although I still don't understand why Starfleet fired her because Picard quit. That doesn't make sense to me.
That's a bit strange. And the book very much sort of goes into how the mission, it wasn't so much Raffi's addiction, it was as much the mission with Picard to go into Romulan space that ends up failing, which is what causes her to distance from her husband and her son when he's young. Okay. So that's a major chunk of it as well. It's not just the show sort of indicates that it's just the conspiracy theory. And it's just the drugs. But it's in the book anyway, which isn't fully canon, as we've talked about on the show. But if we assume it's pretty canon, then, it is a build-up of things over the years. But the show really sort of leans into the fact that she lost her mind with all this conspiracy theory stuff after she got fired, as you say. And also suggests that she maybe went off with somebody else. Because he says something about how, you abandoned us for some crackpot tin hat or something like that. So Did she leave them for a conspiracy theorist person who she's no longer with? You know, who's he talking about there? Because he's not talking about Picard, as far as I'm aware. Picard's not a tin pot crackpot, and he abandoned Raffi himself anyway. So
yes, he abandoned everyone, and as we've established.
So there's still some things we don't quite know, and he also mentioned something called the Conflict of Eight. Did you pick up on that as well?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was like, is this... I literally thought to myself, is this in a comic? Is this in a book? All jokes aside, I didn't know what that was.
Well, actually, the Conclave of Eight... Actually, not the Conflict of Eight, the Conclave of Eight, according to Memory Alpha. So, what is the Conclave of Eight? I wonder.
Well, what was the location at the beginning of the episode? Wasn't that like the Seven Domes or something?
The Seven Domes. Yeah, the Seven Domes.
I thought those might have been connected, perhaps. I guess they weren't.
I don't know.
Numbers and locations. I guess more mystery box material for you, Tony.
Definitely. So I think the stuff that Raffi has found out over the years that will conveniently pop up and be relevant. Maybe the Conclave of Eight is the Zad Vash, and it's the people in the Zad Vash, so like the Commodore in Starfleet, and who's undercover and stuff like that. Who knows?
Well, brief aside, very brief, but like we're talking about the wife, his wife, Vulcan or Romulan, Commodore O, which sunglasses in Star Trek really like that, very out of place. But people are like, is she a Vulcan? Is she a Romulan? And now I finally understand why Star Trek 3, my favorite Star Trek movie, was supposed to be Romulans. And Leonard Nimoy was like, no, people are going to get confused about Vulcans and Romulans. Let's use Klingons instead. Hence, we have all this Romulan, Klingon, birds of prey, cloaking devices, kind of, they kind of switch personalities, the races. Because of that movie, it's a turning point in Star Trek, really. But I thought to myself, that's not giving audiences enough credit. We can tell the difference. No, we can't. So they were right. Because, there's a reason why Next Gen gave the Romulans the head bridges. People are like, why did they change the makeup? Everybody talks about how they changed the Klingons for the TNG era or the motion picture era onward, right? Nobody really talks about the Romulans, but now we have both kinds of Romulans, and I guess the ones from the north and the ones from the south look different. If we're to infer the conversation they had at the chateau when they got attacked by the Jadvaj.
Yeah.
Because you're a dumb northerner, or southerner, or whichever she says.
Northerner, I
and,
think. Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, that's very helpful to have them look different. Because we're sitting here every time I see a Vulcan or Romulan, and they don't say, "Hello, I am a Vulcan," or "Hello, I'm a Romulan."
Yeah.
I don't know who they are. And in a series where like the Romulans are like the villains here, and that's such an important thing to know if someone's a Vulcan or a Romulan, it's kind of confusing and distracting. That's my take.
Yeah, no, it's true because there was very visual like differences, weren't there? You know, you knew a Romulan was a Romulan because they usually had that. For one thing, they had the costume, didn't they? They had the
shoulder pads.
The shoulder pads. They had the big shoulder pads, the big 80s shoulder pads, and they were usually military. You used to see with Romulans, really. So you kind of knew, and the Vulcans had more of a softer look, and they would wear big robes and all this kind of thing. So you very much knew the difference. Whereas, the character of Pell, his wife, is I'm going with Romulan, but we could be contradicted. Who knows? But anyway, things aren't left well with her son. Whether we'll see him again, I don't know. But Raffi still obviously hasn't resolve that issue, which is no wonder really, because she's still clinging on to this idea of conspiracy. I mean, she's going to be right ultimately, she is going to be the vindicated conspiracy theorist by the end, sure, but I felt it was a very overwrought scene though. I mean, the actor playing the son, I mean, he was
strongest actor.
No, not at all. He was ridiculous. He was almost laughable actually in some of the way he was playing it. And I do feel like Michelle Hurd is a better actress than some of the material she's getting, actually, as Raffi.
You're shit out of luck, JL.
Yeah.
Damn.
I think
like
she's...
that's her in a nutshell in this, and I agree with you. I think she's a better actress than what they're not doing her a lot of favors in the writing when they give her, like, well, are you out of your damn mind? Like, these are the kind of lines they give her to Picard, and that's what she's kind of one note up to this point in this scene, at least, in my opinion. It
feels a bit like they're trying to make her almost like a female Bones, a slightly grumpy... confidant who comes out with things. You out of your mind, JL?
Well, she's Zoe from Firefly.
Yeah,
she is.
Yeah, exactly. So this is it. There's always some genesis somewhere, isn't there? But I think I have moments where I like Raffi, and there are moments I find her really cheesy. I mean, the moment I liked her, for instance, is when she's talking to Seven about the Fenris Rangers, and she's saying, I appreciate what you guys did, and Seven gives her a bit of backstory. That kind of thing is good. But then there are other times I find her really annoying, and I'm like, oh.
For a show that's moving so slow, I wish we would have gotten to know more dimensions to all these characters.
Yeah.
Like you think there would be more character moments, but unless you've apparently read the books or the comics, there's really not a lot of insight so far into all these new characters, and that's why I find myself, when it's not Picard, or at least 7 of 9 in this episode, I'm really not engaged in what's going on with these people.
It's becoming a bit of a problem, that, isn't it, actually? Because I find myself, how many times this podcast already have I said, oh, well, in the book, in the comic, it's been like, that's a bit worrying that I'm having to say that a lot to sort of explain the context. And maybe it's an example of why... I mean, there's an argument already, I think, being made on Twitter by some people about how maybe this needs to be more than 10 episodes. That maybe it's not enough. Even though the story might be moving slowly, I get what your point is, but also... Is there just so much plot that they don't really have time to do these character moments? I mean, that's a big question mark, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just thought of this as we're talking about this. Like, you're going to tell me that, not you, but it's just universal you. Right?
Yeah.
You're going to tell me that I'm being too much of an Uber fan because I want Bruce Maddox to be played by the same actor and have some explanations for what happened with him and Data and these characters, but yet also I need to go buy all the comics and books to understand what's going on in your show. I feel like there's a disconnect there somewhere, and I don't know where that is, but I just want to leave it at that.
No, it's a good question, isn't it? I know. Yeah. But yeah, so anyway, we're back with the other crew. Picard is in full, hello mode, as the mode. They're meeting Bajazzel, and we find out here that Seven had a long existing relationship. The nutshell of it is that Bajazzel pretended to be Fenris Rangers, and she was secretly this gangster, and she tricked the science ship called the USS Coleman in 2386, which Icheb was a lieutenant on. And we see his Lieutenant Pips earlier on. and it's all a ploy. Once Seven has talked about Icheb to trap him, to get his Borg appendages and things like that. So presumably for the last 13 odd years, Seven has been trying to find Bajazil, for one thing, which is a long time. And and that's essentially the backstory. But obviously, Bajazil drops in her actual name, Annika. Now we know Seven's name is Annika Hansen. That was established in Voyager, and obviously meant to be and a lot of the dialogue denotes a very personal relationship. Seven describes herself as the one that got away, and she's talking about the Borg drone, aspect, but she's also talking about something else. And I think this essentially establishes that Seven had a sexual relationship, I think, with Bajazil. I think that's the strong inference we're meant to get here, Zach.
Yeah, there are heavy undertones in that area, and Seven was established as a straight character on Voyager, so I guess she decided to experiment when she got back to the Alpha Quadrant. I mean,
I could buy it. I could buy it, to be honest. To me, that didn't seem beyond belief. I mean, because I never really bought the Seven and Chakotay relationship anyway.
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, that was rubbish.
The worst relationship in Star Trek, which they throw in at the series finale to give some kind of motivation for the actions in that episode. So
it was rubbish, and I
guess my point is, like, in a show and a series where they're changing so much, and we have to get caught up in so many other things. Like, do we need this as well? Like, it's another change. For the character, I guess, but
it's true. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, is that a choice they've made in order to bring in some extra, sexual diversity into the show? And they wanted Seven's sexuality to be fluid, so they could add that in to add that frisson. Is it done in order to establish that Seven, essentially was corrupted by this woman? Because again, this taps into one of the big reasons as to what happened to Seven. Particularly after the Mars attack and the Federation pulled out of the neutral zone, what happened? She fell in with the Fenris Rangers, and she presumably fell in love with Bajazil, who was undercover herself, who was a criminal, and she corrupted Seven and betrayed Seven. And, then the other side of me is, well, does that make sense? Was Seven open to that kind of corruption? And on one sense, maybe. Maybe because she doesn't really understand humanity in the same way. Maybe she lost touch with Janeway and that strong, force for good she had. The people around her on the Voyager crew who weren't there anymore had all moved on. And maybe that's when she just slipped and she didn't have anyone to ground her, and she fell in with people like Bajazil. I mean, it's all backstory we might get one day or we might not, but I think it's interesting. I can kind of believe it, to be honest.
Definitely a book coming about that. Absolutely. So this is all Admiral Janeway's fault for changing the timeline.
Yeah.
All right. Had she not gone back in time and gotten Voyager home sooner, none of this would have happened.
Yeah. Blame blame Admiral Janeway. Should be a T-shirt. Yeah. Blame Admiral Janeway.
And I think what they should have done with this, like, reveal of, well, not the reveal, but the decision of Seven to help them. What she should have been like, all right, well, I'm just here, drop me off a free cloud, I'll find another ship. She finds out that this is the person they're after, and then she changes her mind. As opposed to, oh, we need to help someone? Well, I'll help you. Like, I don't know, it's just, and then you're like, why would she change her mind like that? Oh, now I know, because she wanted to get to this person. Yeah. So I just feel like there was a better way to plot out her apathy, and then I'm going to help you no matter what. Just time it a little bit differently in the layout. So.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, that might have worked a bit better.
Not a Monday morning quarterback here. I'm just
saying,
like, there's a...
No, I get it. Yeah. But obviously, Seven is angry at Bajazil for Icheb, and they have to talk her out of killing Bajazil there and then, don't they? Really? So
there's a Mexican standoff, so to speak. Yeah, everybody has guns.
Although it ends just a bit flat, I think, because there's no real it's just a few words like, yeah, just don't do it, and you can get her later. Rios basically says, and then they just all beam out, and I was a bit like, would it not?
Yeah, everyone is just kind of, it's a very boring Mexican
standoff. It is. Like, where's the tension? Like, I didn't really feel any tension there at all.
Absolutely. Yeah, I felt that as well. So, or didn't feel that as well, I should say.
Yeah. And it just felt expedient for plot purposes. They need to get Maddox.
I'll give you Maddox. Let me live. Okay, we're going to go now. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And they all beam out.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, fine, all right, that does the job, I suppose. And Seven explains, who Icheb was, and you know.
And we see flashbacks again, because in case you missed the first 5 minutes and we're grossed out, here's some more shots of this young man getting his eyeball torn out of his face.
Yeah.
But then Girardi beams them out, having to be calmed down by the emergency psychiatric hologram.
Yeah. Please state the nature of the psychiatric emergency.
I assume, I guess in the book about Rios, we'll understand why he has a whole ship of holograms that look like him with different accents.
I think so.
But I was like, that felt so random to me. But then I guess it does come back around at the end of the episode. Like, that's... They were planting that seed, I guess, there.
I think it's establishing that she's really stressed at the idea of Bruce Maddox coming back onto this ship, because she probably knows what she's going to have to do. I mean, maybe she thought they'd find him dead, or that they wouldn't find him at all, or that he'd be killed down there or something, or the Tal Shiar would get him or whatever. I don't think she necessarily imagined this might happen. I don't know. So I think her stress level, and it's trying to establish that she's more stressed than she should be, trying to beam people out, you know? So that's there, I guess. But it just all... It all sort of, you know, they get back on the ship, and that's kind of it, really. It's then just the sort of a few sort of resolution scenes, and I mean, we'll talk about the Seven and Picard scene in a minute. But before that, I just want to talk about the Bejazzle stuff, because this obviously then sees Seven go back and she murders Bejazzle. I think people are going to have a real problem with this, to be honest. Because
and that's why I would prefer this to not have been 7 of 9, considering how the character ended.
Because Bejazzle's obviously a bad guy, and she's a very one-dimensional bad guy. She rips out the ex-Borg things out horrifically. She's a gangster. She's happy to kill people. She's not a sympathetic character in any way we should care about and we want to see live. Sure, okay, I get that. But 7 is now essentially a murderer, a cold-blooded murderer. She executes a woman with vigilante justice. And, I mean, did any of this really need to happen? You know, I mean, that's the big thing. And I don't really know why, like, except to establish that, and this goes back to the 7 and Picard scene, doesn't it? Because she asks Picard, she says, you know, do you feel like you've got all of your humanity back? And he says, not quite, you know, basically, but I'm working on it. And then it feels like she's learned something, and then she completely contradicts that. When she goes
because Picard's like, I'm glad you didn't kill that woman.
Yeah.
Right? And then they're like, oh, we've learned the lesson that revenge is not the way, right?
Yeah.
Cliche, but a good moral message, right? And then she's like, can I have some phasers? He's like, sure. And then she beams down and kills everybody.
But did you think he knew, though? Because there was a look on when he says that, and he goes, okay, I feel like he knows what she's going to do, though.
I didn't think so, because, that's my favorite moment of the episode, and that's what I wanted from a Picard 7 of 9 interaction.
Yeah,
like let's explore, and that's such a missed opportunity, because if they're gonna skip the fact that if they're gonna say they'd never met before, right? Then you can have that conversation. If they had met before, you'd be like, well, why are they talking about this? They would have talked about it 20 years ago when they met.
Yeah.
Like, you know, being an ex-Borg.
Yeah.
It's just like, have you ever felt whole again after leaving the collective? He's like, no, but we try. And she's like, every damn day of my life. Like, all right. All right.
And then the Voyager theme comes in, remember? Then you hear a little bit of Voyager.
You hear the slight bars of the Jerry Goldsmith Voyager theme.
Just to sell the point.
And then she beams down and kills everybody. So that's great. What a triumphant hero moment. Like, you're supposed to be cheering for her.
Right.
And I'm like, but I don't agree with this behavior. But you seem to be celebrating it, show, so I don't know what to think. Well, I'm with you on that.
Is it? I mean, this is where maybe maybe this is unfair, because maybe we'll see 7 again and she'll reach some level of redemption. I don't know, or she'll learn. I don't know, and I feel like that will happen in some way. But I think
it'll be in a book, Tony. It'll be
in a book. But I think that it's just a strange choice to make, and I hope there is some level of understanding and payoff later for this, but I'm not sure I believe that 7 of 9 would murder someone like this. I don't know, and part of me thinks, okay, maybe as revenge, if she's untethered and she doesn't have a good guiding hand, and that she used to be an ex-Borg and there's a level of humanity that isn't there, and I understand all of that. And I get that maybe without those strong, good influences in her life, that she's gone down a dark path. Yes. But at the same time, I don't know. I feel like it's a shock value for you to go, oh, wow, 7 has really gone into a dark place. And I feel like we knew that anyway. I would have rather her just beam off and go, really. And Bejazzle's lost. She's lost, ultimately. She's lost, she's lost Maddox, she's lost Seven. What does it matter if she's alive or not, really? So,
and maybe make her a more interesting villain the next time we see her.
Oh, yeah, maybe, So, I don't know.
Well, again, I think about Firefly, in the first episode, there's like a big gangster and there's a job that they botch because they do the right thing and the gangster's after him for a while, and that's another plot, and they catch up with him later. And that episode with that guy is more interesting.
Yeah. So
I'm thinking Firefly. I can't not think about Firefly when I watch this show. But yeah, I just thought you expand the last moment between Picard and Seven, have more of a thoughtful, ex-Borg conversation because they have a unique experience that a lot of people can't share. So let's explore that a little bit longer. Then she beams off, and you're like, okay, she was in a dark path, but Picard set her back on the path of the right. Yeah. And then she's going to go off and not be a vigilante murderer, but actually that they did the opposite of that.
Well, like I say, maybe we will see her again, and we will, that a little bit of this will be redeemed, but we will see. It's certainly teed up. She gives him the little beacon. I think she'll be back, but. We get the last couple of scenes then in which Picard finally finds out about the artifact, which he already, interestingly, knows exists.
Yes.
I thought this was a surprise.
Who knows what and why?
Yeah,
I don't understand.
How does he... I mean, maybe... I'm presuming it's an open secret then. I'm presuming it's one of those things that the Federation know that the Romulans captured a Borg cube and that there's stuff going on. That maybe it's not actually a big secret, that it's just something that they're doing and everyone knows about it.
That is a problem in world building, in my opinion, because we are halfway through this season. We don't know how the Romulans got this Borg cube. I mean, we know a little bit. Yeah. But, why are the Romulans are a secretive race. Why are other people there? Why are there humans there? It's all very... But if it's an open secret, that's fine. I just wish they would have done a little bit more establishing of, okay, everybody knows about this, but it's an open secret. Nobody knows what's really going on there, but everybody knows about it. But I thought this whole time that was a super top secret project, right?
Yeah. I mean, it does, I suppose, explain why there are humans there. That maybe there is some sort of joint operation going on with Federation, with Starfleet, with human scientists, and that it's actually not a dodgy thing, and that it's actually being ran by, because there've been
on
references,
the level, so to speak.
Yeah, and there have been references to the Romulan Free State, which seems to be what the Romulan Star Empire has now become since the neutral zone fell. So that maybe the Romulan the Romulan government actually might be a fairly open place now. It might now they're not the bad guys anymore. Maybe the Tal Shiar and the Zad Vash have rose and taken over the Tal Shiar now, and they're up to no good. But that the Romulan government are working with Hugh's project and human scientists and Romulan scientists, and maybe that explains why Gabe has a Romulan wife. And it could be that the Romulans actually have thawed. And my thinking is that you're absolutely right about the exposition, but maybe they are waiting for Picard to get on that cube so he can be the one who learns this, as we do. Maybe they were worried that when Picard turns up, they've got to redo a lot of explanation, and maybe they wanted to structure it so when Picard learns, we're learning. And I understand that from a plot point of view and a narrative point of view, but at the same time, yeah, it's a little bit like, well, hang on, how do we? Yeah. I get that.
Well, I agree with you, because part of the problem with the Borg Cube hotline is it feels like it has to not progress until Picard gets there, and that's why those scenes are so insufferable.
Oh God!
Along
last
with
week,
the quote unquote romance.
Oh, last week, Zach, that whole scene.
I take it back, Tony. Seven and Chakotay is the second worst relationship in Star Trek after Narek and Dodge's sister.
Yeah, 100%. Narek and Soji.
I keep calling her Dodge's sister because Dodge is the character we actually got to know.
Yeah, it's true. Actually, yeah. Dodge is the one you care about, really, isn't it? As opposed to Soji's just really.
Okay, there's another one. It's fine.
Yeah. But that whole scene where they're skidding through the Borg cube, I just wanted to pull out a phaser and end it, to be honest, at that point. That was so the worst thing I have seen, I think, on new Star Trek. But anyway, so Picard now knows that she's on the artifact, as they're calling, and that Maddox says he sent Daj to Earth and he sent Soji to the cube in order to find out why the ban happened. Is what he said, to figure out the ban. So I think what he's talking about is that he knows there's a conspiracy as to why the synthetics were banned, why his work was completely shut down, and why he then went off and presumably got his own base, which was then destroyed by the Tal Shar later, recently or whatever. And that's presumably when he went off and created Soji and Daj. After the Mars attack, he left. As Agnes said, if we can take what Agnes said at face value, he left. He went off and did what he did. Presumably she's more involved in that than she's let on. But he then created Soji and Daj and however many others there are. He doesn't mention that, but Narek mentioned that there are more. There's a nest, potentially. So as the work continued, is somebody else creating them? Did he just create Soji and Daj? Because there was the two things in the necklace, like twins. I'm wondering, did Maddox just create those two? And has Agnes or somebody else then built more of them? Or is building more of them? And this is what people are trying to stop. I don't know.
Right. I wanted a lot more explanation from Maddox. Yeah. It's like, so hey, how did you get Data's memories? Like, that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, that is big. Yeah.
We're to believe that he could, from one positron, he could recreate, which is BS science, by the way.
Did he get that
Star
from
Trek
B4?
Tried to be science.
Didn't he get that from? Well, yeah. Did he get that from B4?
Well, they said B4 failed.
Oh, okay.
Although, in the talk about comics, right? In the Star Trek Countdown 2009, B4 became Captain of the Enterprise F at the time.
Yeah.
But that's not canon anymore.
Nope.
See, these books and comics, that's why I don't keep up with them, because they're only canon until they're not, basically.
Yeah.
But they say B4 ultimately failed, and I think, that's disappointing because, at least for as big of a just blatant, there are no stakes in this movie thing about the Nemesis was, at least it had a hopeful ending.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
because it's like, blue sky, as you hear in the music, Picard smiles walking down the hall because B4 starts to sing the song. You're like, all right, things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? But this Star Trek has no hope, so they have to remove that. You're right. But it's so odd to me that they lean so heavily into Measure the Man and Nemesis for these kind of like, hey, remember this stuff? I'm like, oh, okay. But then they don't follow through with explaining any of it. Because you're right. They could have been like, oh, well, B4's memory engrams were enough, sufficient enough for me to recreate Data's positron to Matrix. And then just give me 2 minutes of technobabble to at least explain where everybody came from. But now Maddox is dead, and we're never going to find out. Unless Agnes knows more, like you said.
Well, and she will, because she sort of says that, doesn't she, afterwards? She says, if you knew the things I know, and all this kind of thing, I wish you knew what I knew. They hadn't shown me,
right.
So...
Well, to your point, though, you see, because, she kills Maddox. But while Picard and Maddox are talking, we keep seeing, like, them far away and her... Alison Pill looking very concerned and suspicious. And I was like, you know what, guys? You should have just left that out. And then it might have been more shocking. Because when I saw that, I'm like, oh, well, she's going to kill him as soon as Picard leaves.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I thought that. I thought something's going to happen here. She's either going to shoot him or, something. Yeah, I thought that. It was telegraphing that something bad was going to happen with Agnes. Which the episode had been doing anyway, but not quite to the point where I didn't think at the start of the episode she was going to kill Maddox.
Is everyone paying attention? That's how it felt.
But I didn't necessarily think she was going to kill him. So I was surprised about that up until the point of those, like you say, the way they filmed that scene. And then I was like, oh yeah, something bad's going to happen here, even though we don't know.
The emergency psychiatric hologram pops up to try and stop her, but she deletes him or whatever. It's like, okay, is there not a record on the ship of the hologram popping up and saying, hey, you're trying to kill this guy?
Maybe she'll delete that, If she's got any brains, she will. I don't know.
Janeway style, delete the EMH. So has she become more interesting now, or do you find this yet another new Star Trek character twist, which I'm kind of getting tired of, to be honest with you?
The thing is, I haven't really... I haven't really answered that in my head yet. I think... I had a feeling that she wasn't to be trusted. I wouldn't say that I was wowed by this twist. I was a bit more like, okay, I knew there was something up with her, but I'm a bit like, okay, right. A lot depends on what this means. Is she trying to do the right
storytelling,
thing?
Tony.
Is she trying to do the right thing, even though it's a terrible thing she's done? She's murdered a man. Does she know something that she feels that if Maddox is alive, he says that Noonien Sung and you and I created this, this perfectly imperfect people. Does she feel that he's too dangerous to be alive because she knows something that she knows about the Destroyer. You know, that was my thinking. Does she know about the Destroyer, whatever the Destroyer is? So will she be vindicated? Or I don't know. I don't know enough to really judge as to whether I think this is a good twist or not yet, really.
Right.
But at the same time, I wasn't like, I didn't gasp. You know, I didn't go, oh, wow, amazing. I was more like, right, okay.
Well, it's like they think, and I think, you know, I talk about new Star Trek. I guess Kurtzman, right? Because he's one of the leading guys in all this. They think they're so clever. It's like, hey, guys, you didn't think Ash Tyler was Vought, did you? I'm like, no, actually, we all thought that.
We all,
it's like,
we all
hey, Michael Burnham's the Red Angel. Yeah, we all said that, like, after the first episode.
Yeah.
It's like, so I just stop building your season-long arcs over these twists that we all see coming. It's okay to have some twists and turns, don't get me wrong. But, like, you act like it's all building to this moment.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, guys. So,
I know.
So you're right. And 100% depends on where they go from here. So...
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, and I love a lot of that stuff. You know, I love a lot of the stuff Kurtzman's done. I love, you know, Alias, Lost, Fringe, all these kind of shows that did this kind of stuff a lot, and they, you know, and that's why.
Oh, I love Fringe. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's one of those things that if you've seen any of this telly over the last 20 years. You know this kind of trickery. Like it's not new. Like you say, it's not new trickery. It was 20 years ago. It was a bit more like, oh wow, okay, but. Now you kind of can see things coming a bit more, or there are twists that don't really wow, and they are a little bit out of context. So, on the one hand, it's an interesting turn of events, but on the other hand, I mean, if you weren't suspicious of Agnes, what were you doing? Like, surely everyone was a little bit suspicious of her. You know, it's the way the character's written, the way the character's played. You know, I think this sounds awfully patronising, really, and I don't mean it to be, but if you've watched enough television, you know, you can see things coming a little bit, I think. And I knew there was something. So, like you say, I wish that it was I love a mystery box, but I want the mystery box to be satisfying after the fact. And there have been some shows where that's happened. But then there are other shows where it's not. You look back and you go, well, that was a hill of beans that amounted to nothing, you know. And I just hope that's not Picard. That you don't get to episode 10 and we go, is that it? Like, is that what all this was for? And I really hope that's not the case, you know.
Well, that's my point from the beginning. Like, what's this about?
Yeah. And it is an open question,
there you have it,
but. Man. Yeah, anyway, it's intriguing at least, and we will find out maybe a little bit more next week, because it looks like we're heading for the Cube now. And Raffi's back on the ship, because she's sort of tail between her legs, slunk back onto the ship. Picard kind of knew, I think, she'd come back.
Raffi!
There we are.
Come out of your room!
So yeah, it's all speed ahead for episode 6, The Impossible Box, next week. But before we go, Zach, we have got a little bit of fan feedback. It'll probably be a lot more positive than we've been, actually, I imagine.
I know, I feel bad sometimes, because I don't want to rain on anyone's parade who's really enjoying this stuff, but...
yeah.
That's my opinion. So you have yours, I have mine. Exactly,
and that's what's important. Everyone's entitled to it, I think. Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with some a little bit on Twitter. So from at Generosity, who is Jennifer, she's on our Facebook group as well. So she says, I thought the use of names for Seven and Annika /Annika was interesting. Bejazzle knew her as Annika, but I'm not sure if it's a sign of intimacy or that Seven has switched back to a more Borg-like name while she's overcome with revenge and feeling less connected to her humanity. She's question marks. That's interesting, actually, because even though we've interpreted it as a relationship, and I'm sure that's there, as she decided to stay, why hasn't she become Annika? And that was something that a lot of people were. I think in some of the content, the post-Nemesis novels, I haven't read all of them, but I think there are points where she does go by Annika, and she should have, and there was a lot of question marks. Well, would she be Annika when she gets home? Once she's back on Earth and she becomes increasingly less Borg and all this kind of thing. But no, she's
Mary
still...
Chakotay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But no, she still calls herself Seven. So do you think that's a deliberate thing?
I didn't really think of it that way. I think it was, from my point of view watching it was just to show that, she really knows 7 of 9, right?
Yeah.
To use that real name, right?
Yeah.
That name longer has any meaning for me, right? Something like that. So that's an interesting interpretation. Yeah, she kind of doubled down on her Borg identity because she's avenging her, fellow Borg, ex-Borg who have been kidnapped and killed and experimented on. So that makes sense that she would no, I am 7 of 9 and I am here to avenge my Borg comrades. So that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. She continues, I enjoyed the scenes with Elnor more than I expected to. I hope to have my expectations continue to be exceeded by his character and performance.
Elnor.
I think he could grow into a real... much as I've got my reservations about the actor right now, I think he could grow into a good character, actually, Elnor. I think the DNA is there.
Didn't talk about him. Notice we didn't talk about him at all in the at the beginning we mentioned him, and then didn't talk about him at all in the episode because he's nothing.
He does nothing.
He has no disguise.
Yeah.
He is himself. He had a couple of wannabe Worf one-liners, I thought.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I want to see more of him. We devoted a whole, like I said at the top, we saw a whole episode devoted to adding him to the team. Let's put him to good use.
Yeah,
right.
Let's give him what to do. Yeah, definitely. She finishes with, like someone mentioned on Facebook, I enjoyed this episode more because it lacked the Soji Narek storyline. I hope I will enjoy their parts more when the two plot lines converge more closely. I've seen this already quite a lot in people are saying, it was great not to have those two in it. Or the awful character of Rizzo, who is the most... If she had a mustache, it would be on constant overdrive, twirling like that character. She's awful, and it's like So it was. What did you think? It was only it was about 25 minutes in that I suddenly went, oh, actually, yeah, we're not going to the Cube this week, are we? And I was. Last week was awful. The stuff on the Cube was awful last week. It was fine the week before, but the last week's was really bad. So I was relieved. Did you think that? Presumably they're going to converge now, which is good. But do you think that they have been a detriment to this show, really, so far?
Absolutely. Yeah. I realized, about 30 minutes in, I'm like, oh, we're not going to go back to the Borg Cube.
Yeah.
This week, we're going to use our budget for Jerry Ryan instead of 9, instead of that plot line. I see. Although, like I said off the top, I thought if we didn't have an episode with that in it, I would like it. This is my least favorite episode, so you never know.
But that's in spite of. That's not because they're not in it, though. It's different reasons. Right. If you'd had some of the scenes from
Absolute... Be careful what you wish for.
Well, imagine if you'd had the scenes from Absolute Candor in this as well. You would have given it a 2.
Yes.
Thanks to Jennifer for that. On Facebook, Brett Williams says, another great episode. I was ill-prepared for the first 4 minutes. You and us both, Brett. Echeb, we hardly knew thee. Seven's as badass as ever. I assume the card, inverted commas, she gave Picard will have her back. Raffi's scene was gut-wrenching. The alarms going off in sickbay don't sound outside. The EMH doesn't record its interactions. I assume showed Agnes the destruction the synths would bring. Now, that's a good question, because there is that scene where, I think it's in episode 2, where O goes to see Agnes. And we don't see...
In her sunglasses, yes.
In her sunglasses. And I said at the time, I think, or I mentioned it on Facebook somewhere, I'm always suspicious of a scene like that, where you don't see what they talk about. And that could be. Maybe O did tell her everything then. And it's only since that point that Agnes has decided on what she's doing. That's a really good question.
Yeah, because I agree. I don't think she's been in on it the whole time. I think that's definitely when the turn happened, where she was 100% with Maddox up to that point, and then something was revealed to her, and you're absolutely right. That's why we didn't see that scene, because they wanted to have that reveal, and that's why she, I guess, shows up with the Zhat Vash. And then it's waits till the end, and then comes in with a gun. Oh, well, I just showed up to see you, and I don't know what happened.
That makes sense, doesn't it?
That's probably what happened.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's good shout from Brett there. He says, Elnor is good at pretending to be Elnor, and evidently Free Cloud Scans found no vice to pitch in with an ad, which we said. He described it last week, the trailer, as Star Trek Pimps and Pirates, and he said it didn't disappoint.
An accurate description of the costumes, absolutely.
Yeah. On a slightly negative note, the lack of a Soji Narek scene made me realise how much I just kind of muscle through those and don't really enjoy them. So again, somebody else saying the same thing. Craig McKenzie, who was our guest last week, said, a generally strong episode that felt refreshingly on task, though it wasn't without its flaws. I find it odd that Icheb and Bruce Maddox were recast, as we've said, especially when so much has been made of what actors they've managed to bring back. It's probably the first time in my life I can ever say that Patrick Stewart gave a bad performance. His fake French pimp persona was cringeworthy. Patrick Stewart clearly had fun with it, but it was tough to watch. Great use of 7 of 9, and I liked the way she found common ground with Picard over their shared assimilation PTSD. Similar sentiments in a way. I think he enjoyed it more than maybe you did and maybe I did, but I think similar sentiments in some of the criticisms.
Same beats as us, but a more positive spin, for sure.
Yeah. He did add in a comment, actually, later. He said, I have issues with killing Icheb too. He was a good character in Voyager and could have gone on to do more. Do you agree with that? I mean, do you think that... I know you're not a big Voyager fan and I'm not a big Voyager fan, so I don't really give much of a toss about Icheb, if I'm honest. But do you think, if we look at it critically... Could there have been more done there? Could you have brought Icheb back, either with the original actor or not, and done more with the character?
I don't know. I mean, you could have killed Hugh, instead.
Yeah.
But the key was the personal connection between Seven and Icheb. So I understand for a story, the story they wanted to tell, they needed that kind of thing. Now, again, you could have picked one of the other Borg kids, although I honestly forget if Icheb was the only Borg kid to stay with the Voyager when it came back to the Alpha Quadrant.
I'm not sure.
He was obviously the most prominent one, so that makes sense. But again, the whole recasting thing and all that. I just. Yeah.
Yeah. I know.
I'd rather them kill Icheb than like Geordi.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh God. A million times yes. Oh, God. Don't kill Geordie, please. We've already had anxiety about this in this podcast. Geordie needs to live. Okay, Karen Williams said, I had to look away in the first scene, I confess, so awful, but I guess helps to illustrate why Seven is the way she is, as we've said. No mention of Chakotay, or have I missed something? Don't read comics, etc. Karen, you've missed nothing. Like Zach said, I'm sure the Seven book will explain everything with Chakotay when we get that. And I say, we are joking. We don't know that there's going to be a 7 book. We're just guessing. So don't take that as there is a 7 book.
It's going to be called Annika. That's going to be the name of the book.
Annika, yeah. Star Trek Picard, Annika. Could be. Let's just say we're going to put money on there being a 7 tie-in book, but we'll see. Yes. Really felt for Raffi in the scene with her son. The way she blows up about it, though, did make her sound a bit cray-cray. So is she crazy?
I liked that.
Or is she?
I liked that.
Is she right, and the inability to make people believe her made her crazy? You liked that reaction, did you?
Because that's the first scene where I actually kind of cared about this character, to be honest. And you can see that people she's like, well, Mom, you came up with these crazy things about the Romulans. She's like, they're not crazy. They were behind it. You can see that's how she reacted to stuff. How she would dig the hole deeper for herself. Yeah. And that felt genuine to me, like a real conspiracy theorist, not being able to, have a conversation about this in a level-headed way. So I agree. I like the way that was played, for sure.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. She did it well there, Michelle Hurd as well. Lastly, final comment to Jeff Fountain, who says, Dark Trek is here to stay, which makes me happy, lol. So Dark Trek's got at least one fan there, Zach, I think. So thanks, guys, to everyone who's commented. Do keep the comments coming on the Facebook group as well. Even though they're not going to be read out in the podcast, we'll have a chat about them. We'll discuss them. We'll pick through things. So thanks very much for letting us know what you think about Stardust City Rag. And Zach, it's been great to chew this one over with you. Critical, I think, in a fair way. Picking out the positives as well while we've gone. We haven't been completely negative all the way through. So,
right.
We've found the good things in it, and there are good things in it. So thank you so much for coming on Make It So. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. So why don't you point people in the direction of where they can find you for more on Zach? See what I did there?
Look at that segue. Yes. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me personally on Twitter at MooreOnZach. That's MooreOnZach. And that was the point of my Twitter handle. Tony, he nailed it. For more on me, go there.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not a moron.
No,
but...
definitely not. No.
Also, I am a co-host of a podcast called Franchise Fatigue, which I do with my friend Brandon Shea Matella. We talk about movie franchises when they get fatigued. Series of movies, sequels, remakes, reboots, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And you can find us over on Twitter at UFPEarth. And as we mentioned off the top, I have wrapped up my tenure at Trek FM. But you can find over 150 episodes of me talking about the original series and all things in between over there at Standard Orbit. So you can find us over there at Trek FM. And actually, as of this recording, next week is our big 300th episode, our final goodbye. You play a prominent role in that episode, Tony, because we're doing a radio play of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. I am, of course, Captain Kirk, and you, my friend, are Sean Connery as Cybox.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's going to be a lot of fun for it to hit the airwaves. And then let me just say, Tony, I've really enjoyed talking Star Trek with you, so thank you for inviting me on the podcast. I feel like, I can just tell it how it is.
Yeah.
When we talk about Star Trek, sometimes, to be honest, I feel like, okay, I'm gonna soften this opinion because I know people feel a certain way, and I don't want to ruffle any feathers. But I know we have a similar mindset about these things, so I really have a good time just riffing on Trek with you.
Yeah, same, absolutely. Well, you will hopefully absolutely be back on Make It So at some point in the future, and we can talk Trek again in some way. So it's been really great. Thank you. And I won't be back next week. It will be Kurt back from his secret Section 31 mission to talk about Episode 6, The Impossible Box. Which will see the Cube and Picard and the Last Sirena finally come together. But I will then be back at a later date, and we've got some really cool stuff coming up there as well. So, make sure you check out the podcast, the Facebook podcast group. You can find the link in the show notes on Facebook, Make It So Podcast fan group. Do follow us on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard. And make sure you check out the We Made This Podcast network at We Made This Pod, and we're going to give you a little bit of a taster of what else is going on the network just after I say the classic word. And Zach, I'm going to say it in a particularly Gallic way today. Engage! Previously on the We Made This network. We buy records.
Paul, listeners of our last episode will recall that you've been on your holidays. And it was such an odyssey that it couldn't possibly fit into one episode, could it?
No. Last week's City Report was from Los Angeles. We also headed to a couple of other places, and this week we are going to have a short City Report on San Diego.
Now, does this contain one of the things that you teased last week as being even better than...
It does.
Okay.
But where we're going to start is Feel It Records, which is...
Feel It.
Feel It. Feel It. Records.
What's the it?
I don't know. That's what it's called. Been there twice now.
You didn't think to ask?
No. Well, I didn't. But we are going to have a little interview with the owner, Mark Allen, which we can hear now.
Pick up a podcast.
Overall, over the past year, what has been your kind of primary thing that surprised you the most within any of the films that you've seen, or any kind of like stories or things that you recognise that would be interesting for people to hear?
Chris and I have just reviewed a film which was oh my god, what's his name? David Lynch's
short story.
Straight Story.
Straight Story. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a very generic title, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we've reviewed the David Lynch Disney film, which I had no idea before Chris picked it that there was ever a crossover of that caliber.
Fast, Furious, and a bottle of Corona.
Each week, when we talk about each Fast and Furious movie, we're not just going to talk, ad nauseum for the whole an hour or something. We're going to both bring 3 things to the table that we've taken from that particular film. So the first film, I'm sure there'll be a lot of nostalgia for this classic film from 2001. We'll be talking about how the series has changed. Might even talk about things like the Vin Diesel and The Rock feud and all that type of stuff. We may even get into supporting films and stuff. What are you looking forward to about this, Wes?
Well, it would be nice to sort of see through a sort of a jaundiced lens, because I'm against this sort of whole corporate branding monster. But
check out all of these shows on the We Made This Podcast Network. Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website www.wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.